and I'm not quoting Senator Flood's words specifically. This is just kind of how I heard it, so I don't want to pretend that I am. But this is a defense. It's still a crime. The only time that you assert a defense is when you've been charged with a crime. And so it's still a crime to carry a firearm, but there is a concealed firearm, I should say, but there is a defense, and the defense right here is both narrow in scope and duration. It is affirmative defense that the defendant was engaged in any lawful business, calling, or employment at the time. So it's a fairly narrow defense as far as I can tell. This is still a crime, and I think it's important to point that out. Now, and I was going to yield Senator Flood some time to respond to that, but I can't yield Senator Hunt's time. So that plan is gone. But maybe I'll ask him in a question in a second. I also want to note something before Senator Flood and I have a discussion about this, is the Police Chiefs Association of Nebraska is still opposed. I wanted to make sure that I confirmed that over the lunch hour. Police Chiefs Association of Nebraska is still opposed to this legislation, and so is the League of Municipalities as well. So this isn't just the Lincoln Police Department and the Lincoln Police Union, and I suppose OPOA and OPD are now neutral, but there is broader groups throughout the state of Nebraska that are still opposed to this legislation. I think it's important to note that for the record, that it's not just the Lincoln Police Department. And with that, I don't know if Senator Flood would like to yield to a question or have more discussion on this. I know I can't yield him, so happy to provide an opportunity.
Senator Flood, will you yield?
Certainly.
Senator Flood, do you have anything to respond with in my analysis of the statute or the current crime?
No, I think you accurately portrayed it, and the part of the affirmative defense that you called the attention to was that it is still a crime to carry a concealed weapon in the state, I think is what you want to emphasize. The affirmative defense obviously invalidates or renders the criminal liability, negates the criminal liability. And my point is, why go through the legal gymnastics of that if you already have an affirmative defense? Why don't we just simply,
1 minute,
call it a spade a spade? I mean, you can do this already in the state. So we disagree on this, but you're accurate when you talk about an affirmative defense.
Thank you, Senator Flood. I just wanted to provide some opportunity for Senator Flood to be able to respond. And again, I just want to note that you have to be doing this in the scope and the course as narrowly defined in the statute. So this, to me, is not some kind of free-for-all and negates the need for the permitting process, negates the need for a permitting process that we are told by law enforcement that is necessary to provide more safe communities and also keep them safe as well. And I'm going next time when I get on the mic, I'm going to get the letter from the Lincoln Police Chief and read through that, because I think that—
Time, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hunt, Senator Moorfeld, Senator Flood. Senator Gregor, you are recognized.
Thank you. Mr. President and members, I stand in support of LB 773, AM 1757, and AM 1794. I have served with Colonel Brewer in the military, and I know, as he has said himself earlier, he does not take this lightly, this being the decision to bring this bill. That being said, Colonel Brewer's bill just protects Nebraskans' right to bear arms. He is not advocating that each and every individual go out and arm themselves. This decision must remain with the individual. They must have personal responsibility to know whether they are making Nebraska safer or are they more of a hazard by carrying that weapon. Colonel Brewer is a very reasonable individual and has shown he is willing to work with others to make this bill the best bill possible. I will be voting green to move this bill forward and encourage all of you to do the same. And I yield the rest of my time to Senator Brewer if he so desires. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Gregor. Senator Brewer, your yield time, 3 minutes 45.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Greger. All right, so we just heard from Sarah Moorfield that the police chiefs are opposed. There's a little bit of information everyone should understand is if you go out and speak to the police chiefs outside of Lincoln, again, we came to an agreement with Omaha, and I'll gladly give you the name and phone number of all the police chiefs in my district. This is not how they see the world. I'd love to give you the phone numbers to all the sheriffs, to include my brother. Ask them how they feel. I think you'll find that there is a different view of this bill outside of Lincoln. So we will see how we engage on this issue of law enforcement, but understand, I was a reserve police officer. I spent 4 years commanding the Counter-Narcotics Task Force with the Nebraska State Patrol and the National Guard. Spent 4 years in Afghanistan doing counter-narcotics work with the DEA. I was the DEA fellow to the Army War College. So I think I understand the needs of law enforcement better than most. So along with my comments about how I take this right as serious as we can take it, I also take protecting the police. That's why I'm a little bit confused why all of a sudden everybody seems so confused about this amendment and can't quite get their arms around it and how it's racist. And we're going to have a conversation about that. We're going to call the people to the mic who made those comments, and we're going to let them dig through the bill and show me in there where this is racist. And then you can enlighten us all. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Vargas, you are recognized.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, I just wanted to, I haven't spoke on this and I wasn't planning on doing too much in terms of speaking on it. I wanted to make sure to listen and learn, but there were a couple things I wanted to make sure to react to. The first is, look, our communities, and I'm speaking on behalf of my communities as well, and even in our state, we've experienced some more gun violence, and there are plenty of new stories and data to look at that, and to prove that point. You know, we did hear from not all law enforcement, but many law enforcement across the state, including the Police Chiefs Association, that did come and opposed, and they still have concerns. And, you know, this went through a different process. It got pulled out of committee. And so I'm not looking at the testimony or exactly what is stated, but I hope we can have more information about how they were opposed. But they still have concerns, and I think that's the point. And it should be a flag if there are concerns from enough of an association of individuals that, look, this bill isn't meeting all their concerns yet. Even many of whom have actually stood by law enforcement in the past. In the end, I don't want to pass laws that could make our communities or our kids less safe. And that is what I did see in some of the testimony. And I wanted to make sure that was clear, because I think at the end of the day, at least what I'm still hearing is the law-abiding gun owners aren't really affected by this. It's just changing the circumstances for them. I want us to all be interested in doing everything we possibly can to ensure the public safety, and that any bad actors have a harder time to secure a kind of weapon. But there are still a lot more questions and answers, and I just wanted to make sure that was clear. I yield the rest of my time.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Brewer, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. All right, let's go ahead and jump into AM 2106. This is the amendment that we worked on for 42 days. With the Omaha Police Department, we met with a variety of folks to try and understand what their concerns are and how we could come to a place where we say we could agree. Now, Omaha is unique. It's our biggest city, has the most challenges, especially when it comes to some of the issues that we had to deal with crime and having possession of a gun. So when we finished, these are the three that we agreed upon. It would authorize cities of the metropolitan class, Omaha, to continue to maintain a handgun registry. This registry does not and would not under LB 773 apply to concealed handgun permit holders. The current Omaha ordinance forbids the city from registering handguns for people with certain misdemeanor offenses. This effectively bans them from having a handgun in Omaha. The amendment would stop Omaha from using registration as a shadow handgun ban. It would say that a person engaged in the commission of certain covered misdemeanor offenses could still be charged with carrying a concealed weapon. The covered offenses would have to be provided beyond a reasonable doubt in order to allow conviction for a related CCW offense. And the third item, it would make third offense failure to inform a Class 4 felony. The current Handgun Permit Act requires a permit holder who officially contacts any emergency responder, that would include law enforcement, while carrying concealed, to immediately disclose its presence. Failure to inform is currently a Class 3 misdemeanor for the first offense, Class 1 misdemeanor for the second offense. Now, there are those who got up on the mic and talked about local control. Well, I think 91 of 93 counties declaring themselves a Second Amendment sanctuary county is local control, giving the ability of the Omaha Police Department to make sure that the laws we pass here either are even-handed and fair with them, but don't hinder them. And that's where we were. Now, my challenge came in the fact that there were national gun rights organizations who came against this amendment. But here's the dilemma. Without the amendment, you don't have the bill. So we either understand that when the dust settles from this, everybody in Nebraska is better off because they now have constitutional carry, and that Omaha is no worse off. And we've actually changed some of the laws that help. That's where we are with this amendment. Doesn't hurt us, helps everybody in the rest of Nebraska, and protects law enforcement in Omaha. Now, I heard Senator McKinney. I got it. He hates the Omaha Police Department with a passion, maybe justifiably so. But to say that they designed this bill to be racist is not fair, not right.
1 minute.
Everybody I heard discuss this did it in a way to explain what the challenges, what the issues, what their problems were, and their ideas on how to fix it and how we put this into 773 or the amendment to 773. So please understand that there was a lot of work that went into this amendment. The idea is to help law enforcement, not to hurt anyone else. With that, thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Lathrop, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President and colleagues. Good afternoon. I would like to see if Senator Brewer will yield to a few questions.
Senator Brewer, will you yield?
Yes.
Senator Brewer, I'm curious about this. We want to establish constitutional carry, which would mean essentially you have a constitutional right to carry concealed. And as I read AM 1757, I would have expected that we just got rid of the Concealed Carry Permit Act, and we're not. We're amending that. So do we have two avenues? Going forward, if I don't have a permit, I just want to go to the gun store and buy a gun, can I just do that going forward if this bill were to pass with AM 1757? And I guess the follow-up question is, why are we keeping the Concealed Handgun Permit Act around at all?
Actually, very good question. Thank you. All right, so the idea behind this is that you would have two options. So we keep the current concealed carry permitting program as is, no changes to that. Then we add constitutional carry. Why do we do that? If
if Steve Lathrop wants to go down and buy a gun at Cabela's, if you have a concealed carry permit and you go in there and you provide him your driver's license and that permit, your ability to purchase a firearm is expedited because it's just a matter of paperwork and it becomes yours. If you don't, you're going to have to go through a wait period to make sure that you're not a person who should not be able to purchase a gun. The other thing that becomes a factor is if you cross state lines and you leave the state of Nebraska and go somewhere else, you've got that concealed carry permit that you can show to law enforcement in surrounding states that lets them know that you are a qualified, trained person with concealed carry. Because the constitutional carry, you have no rights once you live in the state of Nebraska.
Okay. Thank you for that explanation. And now I understand why it makes sense or why we're leaving it in there. So going forward, if AM 1757 and 773 pass, then what do I got to do to be able to carry lawfully? Let's say that I talked to Senator DeBoer. She's got a handgun. She's going to sell me that handgun. And now I want to carry it around. Who's going to screen whether or not I have a major mental illness or any of the things that the permit process would require and ensure that I'm not a person with I don't want to say a disparaging term, but with a major mental illness or an otherwise prohibited person? I can just stick that thing in my pocket, and as long as no one catches me, I'm okay. That's a question, yes.
Senator Brewer, will you yield?
I would. All right. Again, another great question. All right. So first off, if you were going to purchase a gun from Senator DeBoer, you should do a purchase agreement, a bill of sale, and some type of a documentation to show that you're buying that from her. She would have the requirement to make sure that she's not selling that gun to someone who has issues. Now, remember, if you've got that concealed carry permit and you go down to Cabela's and you've got your driver's license and that and the money,
1 minute.
they're going to give you that permit. And again, you still may not be right in the head.
That may be the point I'm getting to, because under the Concealed Carry Permit Act, they're going to make sure that I don't have a mental illness or somebody hasn't put me on a list as somebody with a mental illness or a felony conviction. And if I buy it from Senator DeBoer, I don't have to do a background check. I'm simply able to. It sounds like you're getting help with the answer
Well,
to this one, and which is fine. I'd like to have a good answer than to have you speculate.
Right. Well, you're going to have two things to purchase a gun. You're going to either have a purchase permit or you're going to have the concealed carry permit. But
Even in a private sale?
Even a
Okay,
private
Dick.
sale, they shouldn't sell it unless they do. That responsibility goes to the individual selling the gun.
Time, Senator.
Okay.
Thank you, Senator Lathrop. Senator Brewer. Senator Friesen, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I will maybe clarify some of the conversation that was going on. So if me as a concealed carry permit holder want to come to Cabela's here to purchase a firearm, I can just walk in there, purchase a firearm, show them my card, walk out with a gun. If I don't have the concealed carry permit or a purchase permit from the sheriff's office, I have to wait 7 days, I think it is, before I can pick up that gun. So that's the difference here in how you purchase a gun. Now me, if I want to personally sell Senator Lathrop a gun, I feel under today's laws and stuff, and again, I don't know quite what the law requirement is, but I'm not going to sell a gun to someone I don't know. Because I have a responsibility also of, if I don't document the sale of that gun and who gets it, I could be held liable because that gun might be registered in my name somewhere. And so I don't want that gun just traveling around. I am going to make that documentation happen. But I'm not totally familiar if we have to me, I've always asked for a permit so that I can see it, so that the person I would be selling a gun to has a permit. I don't have to do that. That's just something I do. I don't think I have to do that, but that's what I do. The thing that I'm listening to here, I just, what I fail to see is how this handgun permit that we have to get, the concealed carry permit, how that makes us any safer. Criminals, someone that wants to do something bad, whether they're just angry and want vengeance or whatever other reason they have, don't care if they have a permit or not. If they have access to a firearm for some reason, whether they steal one or take one from somebody, they're going to do bad things with it. But this permit doesn't stop anything. It doesn't prevent anything. It prevents law-abiding citizens from getting a gun when they want one. I don't feel that I don't see how it makes us any safer. As a, I'm not in law enforcement. I know Senator Brewer talked about that, but I would assume that today law enforcement officers, when they approach any vehicle, their assumption has to be that somebody could be sitting in that driver's seat or in the back seat with a gun. And they really don't care if it has permit or not. I would be worried about the gun. And so a permit doesn't change anything until you go up to the door and ask them to, do you have a gun in the car or do you have a permit? By then it's too late. I'm failing to see where any of this stops anything bad from happening. I do like the part where when you go to purchase a gun, you have to meet some requirements. If you're a prohibited person, you have to fill out the paperwork. If you have a concealed carry permit, which I would still recommend for people, because I think just taking the class was well worth it to me. But as a person, you have personal responsibility with anything we do. You have personal responsibility with operating machinery. You have to take some personal responsibility when you do these things. And if you're a firearm owner, you have to take some personal responsibility to make sure it's stored safely. But again, we can pass all the laws in the world, but there's people who won't. And there's really nothing you can do about it. And making this permit system, I'm just failing to grasp that it does us any good. It just creates a bureaucracy. It adds another layer of charges that you can make after
1
a
minute.
person that does something bad, but it's not preventing anything. Maybe if we had more mental health treatment centers that could deal with some people that might have access to a gun sometime, maybe that would be the answer. But this, I just can't wrap my head around how this helps anybody. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Friesen. Senator Flood would like to recognize 50 fifth grade students from Norfolk Middle School sitting in the balcony. Please rise and be recognized by your legislature. Thank you. We will continue with debate. Senator Geist, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I do stand in support of the amendment, and, well, I stand in support of 1757 and 773. But as I have been discussing with some of my colleagues, I also have an amendment. It's drawn up. It is rough, I would say, but willing to negotiate. Those of you who are interested in having some training attached to this, I agree with Senator Friesen and every single thing he said. Personal responsibility is the responsibility of the gun carrier. I too am a concealed carry permit holder. I do carry frequently. I shoot a lot and I love it, but I'm a responsible gun owner. And I do see value in training. I see value in knowing the laws of the state of Nebraska. So those of you who are interested in talking about that, I think we can maybe make some kind of negotiation to work on getting this across, at least across general file, and maybe adding some training in on select. But I would be interested in having those conversations, because I think that if that's something that's going to get us to a point where we'd be able to have this as an option in the state of Nebraska, those who don't choose to carry a gun, please don't. I would just recommend you don't. Nobody's going to make you carry a gun. But if you do, it is important that you know what your responsibility is. And that is the onus on every gun carrier. Whether you have formal training or not, it's just logical to get some training about a gun if you choose to carry one. Those of you who are not law-abiding citizens, I doubt this is going to change your choices at all. So to that end, I will be happy to talk with any of my colleagues off the side and we can see what we can come up with. And I would yield the rest of my time to Senator Flood.
Senator Flood, you are yielded 2 minutes, 45 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, Senator Lathrop asked the question, Senator Brewer, and essentially said, what happens when I, go to Cabela's and I buy a gun? And I think Senator Brewer answered those questions, but I think it's important to remember, we're talking about the ability to carry concealed. I saw somebody in our rotunda today that was open carrying in our state capitol. That is your right now. You can put this on your hip. We're talking about the difference between putting it on your hip or tucking it behind your jacket. And we already have a system, as Senator Moorfield and I have talked in 28-1202, that statute allows you to carry concealed as an affirmative defense to any criminal liability if you present a reason. What I'm saying here, and I think what Senator Brewer is working on, is trying to find the sweet spot for people, especially with AM 1757. I would offer this as a potential next step. I can sense there's a willingness on Senator Brewer's part to get this over the line. Senator Brewer has worked on this. This is his priority. This is more than a priority for him. What if we adopt LB 773? We put an effective date of July 1, 2023 on the bill and give all of the different players that want to nuance the different next steps the opportunity over the interim and next session to adopt language that refines it. That would be an idea. That would allow us to move forward with LB 773. You could set the effective date to August 1, 2023 to give it plenty of time for the effective date to go into effect. I think what Senator Geist is offering here in her amendment is the conversation about training. I think this is constitutional carry. The state of Wyoming did this. Guess what? Concealed carry permits went up. People still want the permit. They can go to other states that aren't constitutional carry. Plus, they lay that down at Cabela's and they avoid the background check. There is some value to the program. But I personally don't want to put requirements on this at this point. I think we could set the effective date for August 1, 2023. We could see LB 773 become law, and we could work between now and then to refine it, and we have an entire legislative session to work on it. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Ben Hansen, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Sitting here listening to the debate, which is encouraging to actually have debate and work through the logical aspects of the bill, and with some forethought and some options and some opinions. But listening to everyone's arguments, there's one kind of argument that kind of keeps kind of sticking in my head here a little bit, and I was hoping Senator Moorfield can answer a question for me.
Senator Moorfield, will you yield?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Senator Moorfield. So, is there any other right, inalienable right you can think of where we require training in order to exercise that right?
Trying to think. A constitutional right, I'm assuming?
Yeah, inalienable right, yeah.
I'll have to think about that and get back to you.
Okay, I appreciate it. That's one of the arguments I keep hearing coming up is this idea that we can put reasonable restrictions on inalienable rights. And I think to some degree that we do. For instance, Senator Moorfield has said, you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. Okay, well, that makes sense. But in the same aspect, if we're talking about putting training on rights that are inherent, that means then we should probably be taking training classes in not yelling fire in a movie theater before we go into a movie theater. And if you fail that training course, then you can't go into a movie theater. That's kind of how this sounds to me. And it doesn't sound right. So the idea that we require training to exercise a right, a God-given right, is not right. That's like somebody who wants to exercise their Sixth Amendment for counsel saying, okay, well, now you have to take a class in criminal justice in order to exercise your right for counsel. And if you don't pass it, then you can't have counsel. Or the First Amendment. Maybe only those who you have to study journalism in order to exercise your right to free press. We don't do any of that stuff. And one of the arguments they might say is, well, it's because we're talking about a deadly item, such as a gun. I'll tell you what, speech is sure deadly, and it can be. So we should have training on that. Picking the wrong type of counsel, if you're facing jail time, can be deadly. So I think we need to think about that whenever that argument comes up. Because we have no other, I couldn't think of one. I cannot think of any other inalienable right where we require training or some kind of bar we have to meet in order to exercise that right. And if you don't pass that bar, you can't exercise that right. I know a lot of people who've gone to carry concealed classes. Some haven't made it. Some have failed for different reasons. And that means now they cannot exercise their right. And I think that is wrong. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator McKinney, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise again, opposed to LB 773. I'm supportive of AM 1794, but since Senator Brewer brought it up in conversation about my position on Omaha Police Department, yes, I do not like them because they're unreasonable, they discriminate, and they disproportionately arrest individuals from my community. But on the conversation about AM 2106, which would amend LB 7773 to provide that a person shall not carry a handgun concealed on or about his person while engaged in the commission of a covered offense. This amendment re-broadens the crime of carrying a concealed weapon. The listings of covered offenses are also crimes that target people of color or involve crimes that are overcharged against people of color. So maybe they're not outright racist, but inherently or covertly they are. So for instance, one of the covered offenses is any violation involving a controlled substance under section 28-416. This would be simple marijuana possession. The ACLU of Nebraska noted that Black people are 3 times more likely than white people to be arrested for possession in Nebraska, even though Black and white people use marijuana at a similar rate. Another covered offense is any violation of certain city ordinances. These type of ordinances only exist in Omaha and to a lesser extent in Lincoln. Most Nebraska's people of color live in Omaha or Lincoln, and therefore they only will be prosecuted for these covered offenses. In other words, in rural white Nebraska, these ordinances do not apply. This part of the amendment creates a crime that disproportionately impacts Black people. By the way, this is why I think we should do racial impact statements on bills like this so that we can appreciate the impact of these bills on people of color. That's the thing. And then, doing some research and reading some stuff, I found an article on the Hill, actually gun restrictions will affect the Black community. And in this article, it says, today, gun control legislation aggravates the criminal justice crisis in the United States, having a disproportionate impact on Black Americans. The most recent available data from the United States Sentencing Commission shows that in fiscal year 2018, more than 56% of federal firearm offenders were Black. Black Americans are more likely than any group to be convicted or subject to a firearms offense carrying a mandatory minimum. For the country's Black communities on the ground, enforcement of tougher gun laws will mean harassment at the hands of police, more arrests, and more harsh sentences. This is something we have to understand, that leaving Omaha as is doesn't help my community. The original bill would have helped because it would have decreased the amount or the availability of the Omaha Police Department to target and disproportionately arrest individuals. But with the amendment of AM 2106, it keeps it the same and still allows the Omaha Police to discriminate. That is my opposition. No, I do not like them. I don't. It's clear, and I know they don't like me either, which is I'm cool with. It's something that I'll live with for the rest of my life. I don't care. But that's something we have to understand, that standing up and advocating for a bill and saying we're this and
1
this for
minute.
police, it's whatever, but you're disregarding the fact that the police disproportionately discriminate in my community, and that's my problem. You can't look past it. It's a fact. It's truth. All the data is there. Go read the reports. You can't look past that. So excluding Omaha in some wordsmithy way doesn't help me or my community. It still allows the police to discriminate against us, and that's my problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Matt Hansen, you are recognized, and this is your third opportunity.
Great. Thank you, Mr. President. And good afternoon again, colleagues. Colleagues, talking about these issues as a constitutional right, we've had already some people kind of compare this to other constitutional rights. Now, I'll remind you that every constitutional right we have in the Constitution has been a long history of showing what the government can and cannot do. And you could take the plain language of the Constitution, read it out loud, and maybe project what it could do. But if you don't look at case law or history or precedent, you don't necessarily know that it's actually much more restricted than what you would say. For example, we just talked about having the right to counsel. Yes, you do have a right to counsel, but the states can regulate that as a profession. You have to take and pass the bar exam and be admitted to bar practice in the state. You do not have the right to hire a non-attorney to represent you. You do not have the right of whoever you want. You have the right to hire an attorney licensed in the court that you're being charged in. People are eligible for public defenders, provided that they are both indigent and facing the risk of jail time. If you have a high income or you're facing only a fine, you don't have a right to a public defender. That's just on the right to counsel. I mean, the First Amendment right, we talk about First Amendment right, freedom of speech, already has been noted. Yes, there are strong protections for that in a lot of instances, but certainly the government has time, place, and manner restrictions and other things. Is to a pretty high level constitutional right, a civil liberty, there are still pretty clear things the government can and cannot do. We talk about voting. The voting got brought up earlier today. We talk about voting. To vote in Nebraska, you have to register several weeks in advance and provide proof of address. You have to pre-register several weeks in advance in order to do something. Colleagues, that's, take away the, ignore training for the moment, but that's pretty close to what some of these concealed carry permit or purchase permits are, is the act of pre-registering with the government. There are lots of things we do conditionally and lots of other aspects. So to just kind of get up and say it's a constitutional right and everything else isn't our purview is, in my mind, ignoring all the other ways that the government can and does have to kind of provide for some sort of method of operation. Take it to an extreme, obviously every constitutional right or every civil liberty could relate to some kind of absurd outcomes, which is why we have the opportunity as a legislature, as long as we do it fairly, as long as we do it with a compelling state interest, as long as we do it in a certain manner, have the ability to wade into these issues and provide for certain reasonable regulations. And in my mind, again, for concealed carry, asking for there to be some sort of permit and some sort of training is not saying you don't get to bear arms, because as everybody has noted, you can open carry. And to me, the difference between concealed carry and open carry, obviously, is of course knowing whether somebody is armed. Because I don't know about you, but if I walk up to a stranger and I realize they're armed, I have a very limited desire to be in their presence because I don't know. I don't know anything about them. if they're open carrying, I at least have the ability to see that and decide, is this a business I want to walk into? Is this a place I want to be? If they're concealed carrying, I don't know that at all. And so that is why I have the hope and the desire that anybody who's concealed carrying in the state of Nebraska is either passed a background check with some training or isn't allowed to and is in fact violating the law. Because if they're open carrying, I at least can make a decision of, do I want to walk into that store? Am I comfortable in this situation? Should I, cross the street? Should I leave? Because people get up here and talk about, the
1 minute.
lawful gun owners, the law-abiding citizens. Colleagues, I don't know about you, but I cannot just look at a person and decide if they're a criminal or a law-abiding citizen just by their mere presence in front of me. I don't know, and I have no way of knowing. And for me, I understand people are concerned about being assaulted, and that's part of the concern I have too, but I'm also concerned about the gun owner doing that, because I do not see a person carrying a gun as an automatic safe person. And that is why I want to know that either open carrying, I can make a reasonable determination about my own safety, knowing to the best of my knowledge, or two, have some comfort in knowing that they've either passed a background check or are doing it legally and can be arrested for doing it. That's the basic premise here. People have said they don't understand the basic premise. That's it. Like, I can look at somebody carrying a gun and to say, I know what category they could fit into because they're open carrying, and I can at least
Time,
decide for
Senator.
my own safety. Thank you.
Senator Brandt, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me start off by saying I'm in full support of LB 773 and all the underlying amendments. What I'm going to do now is on page 17 of the amendment is read about half a page here of where you can not carry a concealed gun, permitted or not permitted in Nebraska. And this is the list. And it starts off, Section 9, 1A. A person other than a minor or a prohibited person may carry a concealed handgun anywhere in Nebraska except any police, sheriff, or Nebraska State Patrol station or office, detention facility, prison, or jail, courtroom or building which contains a courtroom, polling place during a bona fide election, meeting of the governing body of a county, public school district, municipality, or other political subdivision, meeting of the legislature, or a committee of the legislature, financial institution, professional or semi-professional athletic event, building, grounds, vehicle, or sponsored activity or athletic event of any public, private, denominational, or parochial, elementary, vocational, or secondary school, a private post-secondary career school as defined in Section 85-1603, a community college, or a public or private college, junior college, or university, place of worship, hospital, emergency room, or trauma center, political rally or fundraiser, establishment having a license issued under the Nebraska Liquor Control Act that derives over 1/2 of its total income from the sale of alcoholic liquor, a place where the possession of or carrying of a firearm is prohibited by state or federal law, a place or premises where the person, persons, entity, or entities in control of the property or employer in control of the property has prohibited the carrying of concealed handguns into or onto the place or premises, or into or onto any other place or premises where handguns are prohibited by state law. And with that, Mr. President, I would yield the rest of my time to Senator Moser.
Senator Moser, will you yield? I'm sorry, Senator Moser, you've been yielded 2 minutes, 7 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President. I support LB 773. The change that it makes, I think, is important to our rights as Americans. It doesn't allow people who are prohibited from having a gun to carry legally. If they don't qualify, they can't get the permit to buy the gun in the first place. The question is, whether they have to wear it openly or whether they can have it concealed. They may still want to have a concealed carry permit to have reciprocity in adjoining states. It is a lot of responsibility to carry a gun. And if you pull your gun out of your holster in a situation, you could be a help or you could be a hindrance. So there is a tremendous responsibility. If the person who you think committed a crime is
1 minute.
getting away from the scene of the crime, you can't drop them when they're running away. You have to feel imminent danger. You have to be challenged yourself before you can draw and use your weapon. So there is a lot of responsibility involved, but 1794, I think, needs a lot more study before we pass that. We would be passing that. 1757 is a compromise Senator Brewer worked out with the Omaha Police, and if that's what it takes to get it to work for them, I'll support that. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Flood, you are recognized, and this is your third opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. President, members. Thank you, Senator Brandt, Senator Mosier, for your comments. My constituent, the Pierce County Sheriff, is standing out in the rotunda. He's been the sheriff of that county for a very long time, and he supports Senator Brewer's LB 773. He took the time to drive down here about 2 hours and 15 minutes because he felt that strongly that this is something that should be allowed for people in this state. I want to make the point that when we passed this in 2006, everybody said the world was going to come crashing down, and it didn't. And you might recall that at that time, municipalities had the ability to not opt in, or you could still prohibit concealed weapons. And we spent the better part of the next couple of years figuring out preemption. That was the issue. And so think about the hoops that we've walked through. We set up the permit process. We dealt with the issue of preemption. Senator Brewer arrives on the scene, begins having this conversation with Nebraskans. And here we're talking about constitutional carry. Meanwhile, 21 states have it. 21 states have it. Show me the data in those 21 states that says this is a public safety threat. We're talking about the law-abiding gun owners in Nebraska, many of whom, like in states like Wyoming, permits have gone up. Training has gone up. It seems odd, but it's the case. Again, the Pierce County Sheriff is here. I represent two counties, Madison and Pierce County, Southern Pierce County. The sheriff himself is down here to advocate for the passage of this bill. Mr. President, I think when I share this, Senator Brewer, where he's going, what he wants to do, we aren't breaking new ground here. We're simply adopting what 21 other states have done. I would offer again that if the body would be willing to put an effective date down the road, we could work some of this out. If not, I'm certainly going to vote for Senator Brewer's amendment. I'm going to vote for the underlying bill. I will not vote for Senator John Kavanaugh's amendment. And I would give the balance of my time, with your permission, to Senator Ben Hansen.
Senator Ben Hansen, you've been yielded 2 minutes, 18 seconds.
Thank you. I just want to speak to something that Senator Matt Hansen said, who might actually be like my 12th cousin twice removed. I don't know yet. But Senator Matt Hansen actually is very good at bringing up points and debating, and I always appreciated that. And I think I want to make sure I'm not speaking out of turn, but I think what he said was the government does put restrictions on rights, such as voting. We have to prove that we are a resident in order to vote. And so that is in my mind, I'm not a lawyer, but that is more of a narrowing or a tailoring of a right, not making somebody take a training in order to prove they are able to exercise that right. That would be like us requiring people to take a civics class before they had to vote. I think we can all justifiably say that is wrong. Just as in taking a class to exercise your Second Amendment rights is fundamentally wrong. I think one thing he might have mentioned also is that he can't tell, and I don't think any of
1
us
minute.
can, a criminal versus a non-criminal. And so I think he's exactly right also. But however, it seems like we are treating people who want to own a gun and carry it on their person, whether concealed or not, as a criminal first. And now you have to prove to us you are not a criminal in order to exercise that right. And I don't know any other right where we do that as well. So the dichotomy between our Second Amendment rights and everything else, the differences, kind of point out quite a bit more to me now when I'm listening to debate. And that's just one of the other points I wanted to mention. So thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Moorfield, you are recognized to speak, and this is your third opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. President and colleagues. I want to respond a little bit to Senator Hansen's point. I appreciate him bringing up the training point. I think the difference between having to train to be able to carry a concealed firearm and taking a civics class is, I don't know of too many civics classes that have been used to kill people. I don't know of many civics classes that are considered a dangerous weapon. And so there's a difference in comparing having to have minimal qualifications training to use a concealed firearm and having to vote, or having the right to counsel, or the right to free speech. And let's be clear, it's not an absolute ban on the right to bear arms if you don't have a permit and training. You can still bear arms. You can actually open carry, as we've discussed here. Now, some folks go, well, you can open carry and you don't have to have a permit and training, but you have to in order to conceal carry. Now, going back to my original point, I think there is a heightened level of responsibility if you are concealed carrying, because people do not have notice that you have a firearm. And so people can't react or respond differently based on that knowledge. That being said, I think people can make reasonable arguments that you should have the same amount of training in the background check if you open carry. It just so happens that we didn't pass a law around that. I may support that, actually, because I do think the training is important. I do think the background check is important. And I do think that people that carry firearms in public should have some type of training and some type of permitting process. But that's not the law. And I'm term limited. I'm not going to introduce that. And I haven't introduced that over the last 8 years. But that's not to say it wouldn't be a bad idea. So, colleagues, the reason why we have a training and a permitting process is because you have a heightened level of responsibility if you are a concealed carry owner, because people do not have notice that you are carrying a firearm. So there's a heightened responsibility. And if we want to talk about how there's a disconnect between concealed carrying and open carrying and the requirements, we can have that conversation. But I think I can make a pretty good case for there also being training and permitting requirements for open carry as well. I don't necessarily think that we shouldn't, but that's not what's before us. What's before us is this. And colleagues, I think we have to remember that constitutional rights are not absolute. They are heightened, as they should be, but they are not absolute. There can be reasonable rules and regulations if there's a compelling state interest. And there is a compelling state interest when it comes to things like, yes, the Second Amendment, but also the First Amendment as well. And we have plenty of reasonable restrictions for the First Amendment. You have to get a permit to be able to have a parade. You can't yell fire in a crowded room when there's no fire. There's all types of different permitting requirements and other things that are required to exercise those fundamental rights. If you want to start a religious organization and you want to avail yourself of certain special exemptions, you have to file some paperwork and you have to follow some laws. So colleagues, I go back to a few different things. One, what is the purpose of this law?
1 minute.
The purpose of this law is to ensure that people have the requisite and proper training if they are going to conceal a firearm and carry it. I will be honest, did it take me a little bit of time like everybody else? Absolutely. Was it valuable? Absolutely. Now, can the cost be a barrier? I agree that it can. And as I have noted, I am open to a compromise where we would completely eliminate the cost of the permit and the training. That's something I'm willing to agree to. And I think that that would be prudent, and I think it would make it more accessible to more Nebraskans. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Pansing Brooks, you are recognized, and this is your third opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. President. So there's just so many different questions. Senator Moorfield said he'd be in favor of getting rid of the cost requirement. I too would be in favor of that. I'm not there on the lack of training. I do think training is necessary. Just like when you drive a vehicle, which can be used in a deadly manner, there needs to be training. And, you know, one of the previous senators today, this morning, talked about Nebraska Statute 28-1202 and said, oh, well, we already allow concealed carry. That's just not true. What we allow is the affirmative defense for concealed carry. 28-1202 subsection B says it's an affirmative defense. First, under A, it says that except as otherwise provided, any person who carries a weapon or weapons concealed on or about his or her person, such as a handgun, knife, brass or iron knuckles, or any other deadly weapon, commits the offense of carrying a concealed weapon. So right there, we have created the offense. In B, it talks about an affirmative defense that the defendant was engaged in any lawful business, calling, or employment at the time he or she was carrying any concealed weapon or weapons, and the circumstances in which such person was placed at the time were such as to justify a prudent person in carrying the weapon or weapons for the defense of his or her person, property, or family. So it's just not true that we don't have a concealed carry law. We allow for an exception for an affirmative defense, which is the prudent person standard in self-defense. So, you know, that's a little bit similar to some of the laws that we've had before regarding Narcon when somebody is calling in on calling 911 and they shall not get charged. This is an instance where a prudent person would recognize that a person was carrying and concealed carrying, and it was determined that it was in defense, in their own self-defense. The next thing I wanted to talk about, and I've lost Senator Brewer here, but we have a lot of, I've talked to Senator Geist off the mic because she's offered to work on an agreement, and I'm happy and open to talk about an agreement. And she is talking about something that would change it so that we have an ability to have concealed carry, but have training, and I appreciate that. And we've talked about both online and in-person training. I feel like it needs to be in person, but I appreciate the fact that she's attempting to talk about this with us and find some sort of common ground. What I'm concerned about is that there's confusion about concealed carry and constitutional carry. And I'm happy to have anybody, I was hoping, oh, Senator Brewer, are you available for a question?
Senator Brewer, will you yield?
Yes.
Senator Brewer, can you explain to me the difference between constitutional carry and concealed carry?
Yes. We'll start with concealed carry. So concealed carry is the current program that we're using. would require you to go through Nebraska State Patrol to get a background check, fingerprinting, and you would be given a concealed carry card once you completed
1 minute.
once you completed your training. With constitutional carry, you have to follow the same rules. Everything stays the same as far as the places you can and can't go. Duty to inform, all that stays the same. It's just you're not doing the piece where you have to go through the fingerprinting and the patrol.
Okay, thank you for that explanation. Again, I guess I'm just concerned, we had a senator previously talking about having a study, that we should pass the bill and then have a study. I'd rather study it and then pass the bill once we know what the best options are for this bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you are recognized, and this is your third opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon, colleagues. I wanted to speak to Senator Ben Hanson's question about constitutional rights and whether or not we have anything similar to what we have in Nebraska with concealed carry. So in 1973, there was a court case in the Supreme Court, and it was decided that due to the 14th Amendment, under the Due Process Clause, provides a right to privacy for women's reproductive health. Women's reproductive health is deemed a constitutional right. It is not free. It is not without barriers. It is not without extreme obstacles. It is not without the input of a lot of men. It costs a lot of money to have a child, to give birth to a child. It costs less to terminate a pregnancy, but it still costs something to exercise your constitutional right. It costs money to get birth control, contraception. It is expensive to be a woman, and it is a constitutional right to have autonomy over our reproductive health. I have to go to a certified, licensed medical professional for my reproductive health. So I have to find a specific person who has gone through specific training for my specific needs. But it is my constitutional right to make my choices for myself. So there is a constitutional right that is treated, in my esteem, far more egregiously than whether or not you can purchase something and how you purchase it. I'm actually surprised that nobody else said that first, because I was in the queue for a long time after that question was asked. And I was like, well, I mean, reproductive health is a constitutional right. I guess we forget about that because we have taken so many pains to pretend like it's not, to pretend like women are not a real living autonomous being, but that we are a thing to be treated like purchasing a gun. I 100% disagree with eliminating any training. I don't care if the state pays for the training. I don't care if the state pays for the licenses. But if you want to do anything different with guns, mandatory training that can be free, in my mind, is essential. You force a woman to have an ultrasound before she can terminate a pregnancy. I'm pretty sure you can handle taking a gun class before you can have a gun. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Lathrop, you are recognized, and this is your third opportunity.
Okay, thank you, Mr. President. You look great up there, by the way. Good afternoon, colleagues. This is my third opportunity. I appreciate, I have been here in this session for debates that have not been serious policy discussions, and this one is. And I appreciate the tenor of the debate and the exchanges and the seriousness with which people who are for or against are treating this subject matter. When we were in committee and heard this bill, LB 773, a couple of things you ought to know, by the way. We talk about the chief of police of Lancaster County. The Omaha Police Officers Association came in opposition. They've gone to neutral with a yet to be introduced amendment. So this wasn't just one police chief who happened to come to Lincoln by way of California that we seem to want to bring up, but the OPOA had a problem with it too. And they're neutral now with an amendment. I bring that up because I think some of the debate has focused on statements or comments made by the Lincoln police chief. Two of the issues that we heard in committee, two of the rationale, and when people came in, by the way, they felt very strongly about it, as Senator Brewer does, and they said it's the cost of getting the permit, which is $100, and it is the cost of training. And what we heard today is now we have people that will volunteer to do the training. I want to talk about the training for a minute. There's been some discussion about trying to reach a compromise, letting people do online training. And I got to tell you a little story. I'm happy to be and proud to be a member of the State Bar Association. And during COVID, the good folks over at the State Bar Association said, we're not going to make you go to a training. You can do it online. So now I can sit at my desk and pull up a training pod, register, and watch something on my computer. I'm looking at Senator Flood right now because he's probably done a little remote online training with the Bar Association. And my guess is that Senator Flood and I both maybe did some other work in the office while our training module was on. I appreciate the idea that we're trying to come up with a solution, but I don't think online training is going to get it done. And let me tell you one of the reasons why. First of all, you gotta demonstrate some ability to shoot a gun straight under the regulations. But the other thing is, I went to the training academy in Omaha. I took a tour of that. And the tour ends with you going into a room with a shoot, don't shoot video scenario. And it's like 360 degrees. You go in this room and there's voices and there's a guy sitting on a bench that's clearly mentally ill and he's about to pick up a knife and come at you. And you got to make a split decision. Shoot, don't shoot. Now, I don't expect people who get a concealed carry permit to go through the kind of training that they offer at a police academy, but they ought to have something. They ought to know when they can carry it, where they can carry it. I thought it was interesting, Senator Brandt just read a list of places you can't carry a gun to. I don't know if you were surprised by any of those things on the list. But you know what? If you don't need a permit and you don't need to go through the class, you don't know that. Can you carry it across state lines without a permit? Can you go into the city of Omaha? Can I take it into a church? Where are the places that I can take it and not take it? And where, when can I use it and not use it? Can I pull it out for a threat? Can I wave it around if somebody cuts me off in traffic? Those are the things that training provides answers to so that we're not putting people in a place where they're going to get in trouble in the name of trying to make this easier. We've heard some testimony or some statements made on the floor that in other states that have gone to this type of permitless carrier, more people are taking classes than before. If the class isn't the problem, then what's the problem we're trying to solve? If we're willing,
Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Lathrop. Senator Ben Hansen, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. And yeah, I will concur with my colleague, Senator Lathrop. You do look good up there, so it's nice. So I just want to kind of push back on something Senator Moorfield mentioned earlier when he was kind of countering some of the things that I've said. And again, another person that I do respect his debating skills, and he actually gets up there and gives some good points. And so I appreciate the back and forth that he gives. His analogy, not so much an analogy, but his argument was training to how to carry a firearm is different from other types of training on rights due to the danger that they can impose. And so he used the idea of voting as not being deadly, and so hence why we may not have any training for it. But I can tell you what, voting can be very deadly. If we vote for the wrong person, that can make the difference between something very bad happening and something very good happening, as we've heard on the floor many times from people here, from our past presidents. According to some here, voting for a certain past president was very deadly. So voting can have consequences, but we don't have training on it. We don't have voters take a class to say, look, let's just make sure you can tell the difference between a good candidate and a bad candidate. One who knows the Constitution and one who may not know it as well. We trust the people to make that decision. Free speech can be very deadly. Ask anybody in Germany in the 1930s how free speech can be very deadly. It can happen here. They're different rights, but the argument is kind of the same. At least it should be the same. But for some reason, we treat the Second Amendment differently. It's time to trust the people in Nebraska. And don't treat them like criminals. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Pauls, you are recognized.
Thank you. A number of us approach this issue maybe a little bit differently than those of you who have the law background. I'm going to approach this on a different look at the whole situation. Like I say, most of us, we do have our own baggage. And I'm just going to share some of my baggage. I want you to think back of several years when there were about 5 or 6 boys, high school kids, out hunting. We had a great time. So you go to one of the friends' houses, and we sat around the table and started bragging about all the cotton tails that we had shot that day. Now, all of these individuals had been trained to some degree by their fathers and maybe their mothers, but by their fathers and their brothers. Well, we sat down and had breakfast. A little while later, one kid did not get up because we were so dumb to stack our rifles against the wall, and guess what happens? We weren't thinking. Now, if we had probably been given a little bit of training, that's one reason why I think training is a key to a lot of things in life. Maybe we would not have been dumb to set half a dozen rifles up against the wall and sit down as young boys or young men or having a good time having breakfast, and then all of a sudden, the rifles fall over. That's some of the baggage that I'm carrying. I'm also carrying some baggage that a couple years ago in the Millard school system, there was a principal who came to work full of joy. I knew her. She's full of joy. She was doing her job. Some young man walked in, and she no longer enjoys her job. Also, in that same setting, I would even think the speaker would listen to me occasionally because I don't get up that often. Anyway, another administrator was hurt, and a couple other people. And the interesting thing about that
The interesting thing about that is it was a gun from a police officer that his son had taken and then did his thing. And then later on, he committed suicide, which was not right. So I'm carrying that baggage. Another piece of baggage I'm carrying, when I served on the city council, the Omaha Police Department, they have a tendency to look at some of the issues because they deal with them in a different way. They were not very happy with some of our decisions. In fact, when they wanted to build a new juvenile detention center downtown, they were upset because they wanted to put fewer beds in it and then give more help to the individuals. They worked, and to be honest with you, and I ran, the police did support me. But they were so unhappy with some of the people on the county commissioners who voted to have that detention at a smaller number of beds. They went out and fought viciously. I saw some of the stuff that was going out against one, thank you, against one of the commissioners. So my relationship with the city of Omaha, the police, I want to help them out, but I don't think they should pull us up and down. We're down here and we should do things that are, that would be appropriate. I am not against what the Senator Brewer is trying to accomplish, but I'm just saying that's the baggage that I'm carrying. I see the value of training. What that looks like, I don't know. And if it gets attached to it, that would be great in my estimation. But I do not think that we ought to depend our life on the Omaha's city police's expectations. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator McCollister, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon, colleagues. This is the first time I've spoken on LB 773. I should start off by saying I have enormous respect for Senator Brewer. He has been a great chair of the government committee, and he has done an admirable job in shepherding bills through that committee, including my bill 709. I made the mistake of bringing a gun bill to the Judiciary Committee 3 years ago, and I came to the quick conclusion that I was really out of my element. You may remember that particular time in the legislature where we had people bringing AK-47s and long rifles and everything into the legislature and actually into the hearing. I'll never forget that as long as I live. As a matter of fact, I still have photographs of people testifying with their AK-47s across their chest. Never forget that. And I also appreciate the class on constitutional law that we've had here today. It's been fascinating. Some of the lawyers in this body can explain things particularly well, and I think we've appreciated and benefited from that. About this particular bill, I think I value the training element is currently required for a concealed carry permit. And I would hope that we can figure out some way to continue that. Yeah, maybe some online combination, but I think somebody should be able to go to somebody that teaches these classes and demonstrate that you can actually fire these weapons and are proficient at it. I think that may be something we should look to continue on this bill. And finally, I appreciate Senator Geist's efforts. I hope that we can come to some realistic basis to deal with this issue, finally. I know people feel strongly about it, particularly in the western part of the state. Now in my area, in Omaha, the emails I get are in support of maintaining the permit process that we have. One more thing. I think there is some benefit to going to the sheriff and getting another background check, even if you already have a handgun permit and if you purchased weapons before at a retail store. I think there is a hole that we need to fill with these gun shows. And you can buy a gun in one of those gun shows without actually going through the background check process. And I think that's an issue we need to deal with. Not today, perhaps, but sometime in the future of this legislature. So those are my thoughts so far, Mr. President, and I'm going to listen to the continued debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator DeBoer, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, good afternoon, colleagues. Some of you know that I'm a little under the weather today. For the record, I've had COVID tests. I'm negative, so it's not that. But I thought this was an important debate that I wanted to listen to. When Senator Brewer read the exchange between me and the Lincoln police chief, he probably should have stumbled over my words too, or perhaps the transcribers are a little kinder to me than they should be, because I think I was asking a somewhat difficult to answer question at that moment. I'm a little torn, because I think that we should have a way to have this training free for people. I understand it can cost even like $300, maybe more, I don't know that, but I've heard the number 300. That seems like a lot of money to me, and I think that we ought to have the ability for people to have that training for free. The training is very important to me. I think we should make sure that there is not just a sort of, if you have the wherewithal to figure out how to get the training, you know the right people to find out where to get the free training, then you can get it. I think we ought to make sure that everybody can get this training, should get this training, has the training. Maybe some people won't need it. And maybe that'll be 8 hours of their life that they wasted. And I get that some people will have learned from when they're young, but I'd much rather everyone waste 8 hours of their life than we waste a life because somebody accidentally didn't know what they were doing and shot themselves. Some of you know that my sister died when I was young, and that I was part of an organization called the Compassionate Friends. One of the things I remember most growing up being at these conventions for the Compassionate Friends with siblings who had lost siblings. I cannot tell you how many times I was there with someone whose sibling had died because of gunfire. One of my best friends, her brother was killed in a hunting accident by their father. I'm not saying that kind of thing is often, but I saw the devastation to that family, and I definitely want to prevent that from happening if we can do it as many times as possible. So I definitely want to see training as one of the things that we do. Constitutional rights are very important to me. But we also have to make sure that we're protecting our state. There's always a balance in everything we do here. We have to make difficult decisions in this room. We have to make difficult balances in this room. We don't let people yell fire in a crowded theater. You can't sacrifice puppies as part of your religion. You can't lie about a private citizen as the press. There are limits to our constitutional rights. And I don't think any of us would want to live in a world where there weren't any limits at all to our rights. I think everyone in this room understands that there is some place where we say, all right, we're gonna put a small limit here. The question of where that limit needs to be, the question of whether it's too burdensome, I mean, that's a policy question that we have to answer, I guess. And I don't know, 8 hours of training, the $300, that's a different thing, because that's kind of a thing that that keeps some people out and some people in. But 8 hours of training, that seems like something that's really important to me. So I'm here coughing and listening and coughing and listening. There's now cough drops in a bowl if anyone else needs some. And I'm continuing to hear the points that are being made, and
Time, Senator.
thank you, Mr. President.
Senator McKinney, you are recognized, and this is your third opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the rest of my time to Senator Moorfield.
Senator Moorfield, you are yielded 4 minutes and 50 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator McKinney. I can confirm that Senator Pansing Brooks has a bowl of chocolates and Senator DeBoer has a bowl of cough drops. So depending on what your mood is or what your health condition is, we've got you covered here in row 5 and 6. But in any case, I want to go back to some of the current case law in dealing with firearms in the Second Amendment that is most current. And in doing that, I want to reread, because I think Senator Pansing Brooks read this earlier in the morning, but I think now that we're in the afternoon, it's important to read some of this because people have been bringing up, well, what other fundamental right do we have that requires training or certain restrictions like this? And we've talked about some of the other constitutional rights that do have restrictions because there is a compelling state interest. And usually that compelling state interest is to ensure the health and safety and welfare of our citizens and residents in the United States. So going back to District of Columbia versus Heller, which I believe was actually written by Justice Scalia at the time. Yep, I'm getting confirmation. Written by Justice Scalia at the time, a well-known conservative jurist. So if you go to page 54 of that opinion, it's a very long opinion, but this is, I think, the highlight, particularly for this conversation. Quote, like most rights, the right secured by the Second Amendment is not unlimited. From Blackstone through the 19th century cases, commentators and courts routinely explained that the right was not a right to keep and carry any weapon whatsoever in any manner whatsoever and for whatever purpose. I want to repeat that. The right was not a right to keep and carry any weapon whatsoever in any manner whatsoever and for whatever purpose. And then they cite the case C.E.G. Sheldon and 5 Bloom. I won't read the whole citation, but moving on. For example, the majority of the 19th century courts to consider the question held that prohibitions on carrying concealed weapons were lawful under the Second Amendment or state analogs. I want to step back and say that again. Quote, for example, the majority of 19th century courts to consider the questions held that prohibitions on carrying concealed weapons were lawful under the Second Amendment or state analogs. Our state analog would actually be at the beginning of our Constitution. Pull it out here. Statement of Rights, Section 1, Article 1, Section 1. Statement of Rights. All persons by nature are free and independent and have certain and inherent unalienable rights. Among those are life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, and the right to keep and bear arms for security or defense of self, family, home, and others, and for the lawful common defense, hunting, etc. So going back to the language, for example, the majority of 19th century courts to consider the question held that prohibitions on carrying concealed weapons were lawful under the Second Amendment or state analogs. And I'm repeating myself because we keep hearing arguments here about this being a fundamental right and this violates a fundamental right. It is clear under the current case law that it does not violate a fundamental right. There may be reasonable restrictions as long as there's a compelling state interest. And the court in Heller found that there is a compelling state interest. So moving on. Although we do not undertake an exhaustive historical analysis today of the full scope of the Second Amendment, nothing in our opinion should be taken to cast doubt on the long-standing prohibitions on the possession of firearms by felons. So there's another restriction on that fundamental right. And the mentally ill, or laws forbidding the carrying of firearms in sensitive places such as schools, government buildings, or laws imposing conditions and qualifications on the commercial sale of arms. We also recognize another important limitation on the right to keep and carry arms. Miller said, as we have explained, that the sorts of weapons protected are those in common use at the time. And this goes back to Senator Pansing Brooks's discussion about what common use and what type of weapons are considered common use with Senator Brewer earlier. It may be objected that if weapons that are most useful in military service, M16 rifles and the like, may be banned, then the Second Amendment right is completely detached from the prefatory clause. But as we have said, the conception of the militia at the time of the Second Amendment's ratification was the body of all citizens capable of military service who would bring the sort of lawful weapons that they possessed at home to militia duty. And with that, I'll end for now. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Jacobson, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President and colleagues. I've been listening to the debate all day today, and I like to boil things down into something fairly simplistic. I know we've talked about a lot of things today, but very little of it has to do with LB 773. As I understand it, and I want to be very simplistic here. My understanding is that LB 773 says if this bill becomes law, that I can take what I already have as a right today to open carry a handgun, but now I have the ability to put it in my coat and not be breaking the law. That's what we're debating today. That's what we're debating in LB 773. And I can tell you there's not one person I can think of in my district that doesn't think that's a good idea, including law enforcement throughout the 42nd district. I understand that we've got 1757, which is a minor change, and it's through Senator Brewer's efforts to work with the city of the police department in Omaha, to work with them to help get overall support on 773. So at the end of the day, my view is I'm going to support 773. I'm going to support 1757, and I'm likely going to vote no on the other amendment because I think we're getting a little more far afield of where we need to be. At the end of the day, I want to see 773 become law. I think it's basic, it's fundamental, it's the right of the people who live in this state, and we need to get that passed. So that's all I have to say, but thank you for your time. I will be voting green on 773 and 757, and I'll be voting red on 1794. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator McCollister, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon again, colleagues. I just stood up on the mic here not long ago and made the statement that in Nebraska, you don't need some kind of background check, and that was a mistake. I was mistaken in that view. In some states, yes. Yeah, you can purchase a handgun at a gun show without a background check, but that's not the case in Nebraska. So I needed to correct the record on that. Would Senator Friesen yield to a question or three?
Senator Friesen, will you yield?
Yes, I would.
Off the mic, we were talking about the value of going in and getting a concealed carry permit from the state patrol. And you chided me saying that there's really no value in that. Can you tell the body what your reasoning was?
Well, a permit does not make you a legal person. I mean, I carry a gun in my pickup, and if I leave the gun laying on the seat in wide open view where somebody could grab it, that's where I'm legal. If I hide it in my console or my glove box, then I'm illegal. But again, a permit doesn't make me a better person or make me a bad person. So what good does a permit do?
I understand. We talked about the value of training, and you go and try to get a concealed carry permit from the state patrol, and they require some training. Isn't that correct?
Yes, the concealed carry permit requires training, and I did value the training. I think everybody as a responsible owner should elect to take that training. I don't know that it should be required because a lot of people are not going to probably carry a weapon just because they have a concealed carry permit. But yes, I valued that training.
If we were willing or taking a look to expedite some of that training, what would you want to see continue in that training course?
Oh, I don't think the training needs to be expedited. I think the training, at least that I had, I thought focused on the things that needed to be focused on. It was gun safety, it was the laws that you follow, and then your mental attitude of carrying a weapon.
So perhaps someone should demonstrate going to the State Patrol or some training facility an ability to actually fire that weapon and handle it safely. Should that be part of the process in order to buy a handgun or a concealed carry?
I don't feel that it should be part of it, but I would encourage people, if they want to carry, whether open or concealed, to study up and learn the law, because we've always said ignorance of the law is no excuse. The law is what it is, and by not knowing it is not an excuse for me to carry a gun where it's prohibited.
Thank you, Senator Friesen. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator McAllister and Friesen. Senator Halloran, you are recognized.
Question.
The question has been called. Do I see 5 hands? I do. The question is, shall debate cease? All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Has everyone voted who wishes to vote? Mr. Clerk, record.
34 ayes, no nays to cease debate, Mr. President.
Debate does cease. Senator John Kavanaugh, you are recognized to close on your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I appreciate the discussion we've had. It was a lot longer than I expected. I think people covered some subject matter that was not within my AM. But to revisit what we've been talking about on AM 1794. So the underlying bill here takes us to a place where, well, LB 773, without this amendment, without any future amendments, is how I wrote AM 1794. And it rolled back the requirement of individuals to carry a concealed weapon. It basically eliminated that offense. And so that's the AM 1794 says that if we take conduct that had previously been considered unlawful and now defined as lawful, and someone was previously convicted of that conduct, that person can go into court and use that as an additional argument to get their previous conviction set aside and their record as to that offense sealed. So under current law, you can already do this. If you were convicted, you can go into court, you can petition a judge, you go in front of the judge and you say, Judge, I finished my sentence, I paid my fines, I've stayed out of trouble, and I'm not likely to reoffend. And a judge can look at that and decide whether or not they are going to grant you that relief of a set aside. And then you can go and ask that your record be sealed after the fact of that. And so what AM 1794 says, if we were to repeal a section of the law and make that conduct that you were convicted under no longer a criminal offense, that you can go in front of that judge and say all of those previous things, but in addition, that this is no longer, the offense that I was convicted of is no longer an offense. And so that is a principle that I think is important to articulate when we're having this kind of conversation. A lot of people have had this conversation, and it's been wide-ranging, and it, I think, has been a very good conversation about how we view these issues. This is part of it, and this is an important part. And I've talked to a lot of people off the mic. A lot of people have asked me, about this, whether it's, controversial, whether it's problematic, and I recognize why some people will not vote for this amendment. But I asked somebody, Senator Flood, I don't want to put him on the spot, but I asked him after he said he was not for this, and I said, this is a good amendment. You should be for this. And Senator Flood said, I think, to paraphrase or quote, that if the conduct is against the law, when you commit it, then it's against the law. Something along those lines, about right. Yeah. And so Senator Flood, and he, to his credit, I appreciate Senator Flood's perspective. He and I disagree quite a bit. We are often on opposite sides of issues, but I appreciate his, generally his tenor, his thoughtfulness, how he looks at things and goes through them. So He's entitled to a compliment. I would give him that compliment. And so I thought about this over lunch. He said that to me. And so I went up to my office and I was sitting there and I was thinking, I said, well, that's a good point, Senator Flood. And then I thought about the conversation we've been having. And Senator Ben Hansen said, inalienable right. This is an inalienable right, which is in the Nebraska Constitution. It's not in the United States Constitution. And thought about what other people have said, that this is a right given from God. And whether you believe that our fundamental rights, the ones articulated in, say, the Bill of Rights, the ones that we all say are above other ones, the freedom of speech, religion, to organize, are fundamental, whether you think they are handed from God or they are derived from the consent of the governed to be governed.
1 minute.
I thought I had 10 minutes. No? All right. Well, better round up. But we are arguing here about whether or not this is an essential right, and it is not a right that we are choosing to legalize. We are just recognizing what is, as Senator Brewer is arguing, would be fact, that this is a right. And so when we are recognizing other constitutional rights, we should ensure that we are recognizing them in retrospect as well as prospectively. And that is the point of AM 1794. If you think that the right to keep and bear arms concealed is a fundamental, essential right, then you need to be for AM 1794, because it is not just conduct that was illegal at the time, it was conduct that you believe was your constitutional right at the time. So that's why I'm asking you to vote for 1794, is that we need to recognize in our laws, in our conduct, how we treat people consistently.
Time, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
The question before the body is, shall Amendment 1794 to Amendment 757 be adopted? Now there is. There's been a request to place the House under call. The question is, shall the House go under call? All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
33 ayes, 8 nays to go under call, Mr. President.
The House is under call. Senators, please record your presence. Those unexcused senators outside the chamber, please return to the chamber and record your presence. All unauthorized personnel, please leave the floor. The House is under call. Sorry, please check in. Senator Albright, please return to the chamber. The House is under call. All members are now present. Mr. Clerk, call the roll in reverse order, please.
Senator Wishart, voting yes. Senator Williams, voting no. Senator Wayne, voting yes. Senator Walls, not voting. Senator Vargas, not voting. Senator Stenner. He said, Senator Vargas, you said yes? Senator Stenner. Voting no. Senator Slama. Voting no, Senator Sanders. Voting no, Senator Pansing Brooks. Voting yes, Senator Pauls. Voting no, Senator Merman. Senator Pauls, not voting. I'm sorry, Senator. Senator Merman. Voting no, Senator Moser. Voting no, Senator Morfeld. Voting yes, Senator McKinney. Voting yes, Senator McDonald. Voting no, Senator McAllister. Voting yes, Senator Lowe. Voting no, Senator Linehan. Voting no, Senator Lindstrom. Voting no, Senator Lathrop. Voting yes, Senator Colderman. Voting no, Senator Jacobson. Voting no, Senator Hunt. Voting yes, Senator Hughes. Voting no, Senator Hilkeman. Voting no, Senator Hilgers. Voting no, Senator Matt Hansen. Voting yes, Senator Ben Hansen. Voting no, Senator Halloran. Voting no, Senator Gregert. Not voting, Senator Geist. Voting no, Senator Friesen. Voting no, Senator Flood. Voting no, Senator Erdman. Voting no, Senator Dorn. Voting no, Senator DeBoer. Voting yes, Senator Day. Senator Clements. Voting no, Senator Michaela Kavanaugh. Voting yes, Senator John Kavanaugh. Voting yes, Senator Breezy. Voting no, Senator Brewer. Voting no, Senator Brandt. Voting no, Senator Bostelman. Voting no, Senator Bostar. Senator Blood. Voting yes, Senator Arch. Voting no, Senator Albright. Voting no, Senator Aguilar. Voting no. Vote is 14 ayes, 30 nays, Mr. President.
The amendment is not adopted. I will release the call. Next item for the agenda.
Mr. President, the next amendment I have is from Senator Morfeld, AM 1908. Excuse me, Senator Morfeld. I understand you want to withdraw 1908 and substitute 2297.
Yes.
Without objection, so ordered. Senator Morfield, you are welcome to open on your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, the amendment that was just substituted was an amendment that talks about what I've discussed on the floor that I think is a reasonable compromise. One that simply removes all of the permitting fee requirements and the training fee requirements from this law. And in fact, just looking at it, because it just came down to bill drafting, I want to correct my statement. This would get rid of the permit fee requirement, but not the training fee requirement. So that's something that we would have to work on. Literally just got this back down from bill drafting here. So this would get rid of the permit fee, but it would strike the rest of the bill. So I want to be clear. And I think that we can also work together to figure out the training requirement, because there is disagreement, quite frankly, on whether or not the training can be online or in person, and then what that would actually look like. And I think that there's reasonable disagreements on that. Personally, I'm more comfortable with an online training platform. I know that I have colleagues that are not so comfortable with that, and I think they come at that from a good place. But that is not addressed in this amendment. This amendment, what it does is it strikes all the underlying language of 773, and it gets rid of the fee requirement on the state level for that permit. And then what I'd like to do, if this passes, is work with Senator Brewer and other members of the body to also come up with a free training requirement as well. And perhaps that's something that we can do on select. We can also, if we want, draft something while we continue to debate here as well. But the bottom line is that I've heard from many that the fee requirement for the permit is a barrier, and that the training requirement and the fee associated with the training is also a barrier. Now, the issue with making the training free is that the state would have to provide some type of qualified free training. Because right now, how you go out and get the training is you go talk to a certified instructor that's been certified by the state and is registered with the state. And so there's private instructors, and you'd still be able to avail yourself of private instructors, as how I would see it anyway. But then I think we should also have a free training requirement as well, because there's some instructors that also provide advanced training beyond what's required by the state. And so I don't want to discourage that. And I also don't want to discourage somebody that wants to go to an instructor of their choice. But I do think that we should work on an amendment to this amendment, or to the underlying bill if this amendment's adopted, that would outline a free training requirement on the state level that people can avail themselves of. And perhaps it could be a hybrid. Part of the training is online, the other part is in person. So colleagues, I do want to come to some type of agreement. I talked to Senator Brewer and I outlined essentially what I said earlier. If we got rid of all the fees for both the training and the state permitting process, is that something you'd be amenable to? He said, we'll see. So he did not commit to anything, and I respect that. But this, in my view, is the first step towards compromise. And again, I just want to repeat, what this will do is essentially get rid of the underlying bill and replace it with language that would end the state fee for the permit. And then what I'm hoping is that we can get people together, if this passes, and work on some type of free training opportunity at the state level. I would envision that to be perhaps either all in person or a hybrid or online. I know there's people with serious concerns about it being online, so I don't want to commit to that. But making it more accessible from both a cost perspective and from just general accessibility. I think there's legitimate concerns around that. I thought that myself when I was getting my own CCW. I was able to afford it, but I can see how other people might not be. And if you can't afford the permitting process, you definitely can't afford the training in many cases as well. So colleagues, I hope that we will seriously consider this. I don't know if it's going to be viewed as a hostile amendment or not, but I will tell you this is just one hack to it. We have to be able to solve the training issue too, if we're really going to solve accessibility. And I'm committed to working with Senator Brewer or anybody else on resolving that either on general file or select file if this amendment passes. And with that, Mr. President, I think I'm going to end for now. I'm going to have a little bit more to say once I get back on the mic here. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Moorfeld. Debate is now open on AM 2297. Senator Blood, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I believe I stand in support of this newest amendment. I'm going to sit and listen to the debate as always. And I actually would like to yield my time to Senator Moorfeld if he'd like to get up and finish explaining it.
Senator Moorfeld, 440.
Thank you, Senator Blood. You came up quick there. I wasn't ready. I was talking to another senator off the mic there. So I want to talk a little bit about the Heller decision and read into the record the Heller decision, and also for some of our colleagues' benefit as well. So in District of Columbia versus Heller, I want to go to page 56. And this is again Justice Scalia's opinion. And it starts with, we've turned finally to the law at issue here. As we have said, the law totally bans handgun possession in the home. It also requires that any lawful firearm in the home be disassembled or bound by a trigger lock at all times, rendering it inoperable. As the quotations earlier in this opinion demonstrate, the inherent right of self-defense has been central to the Second Amendment right. The handgun ban amounts to a prohibition of an entire class of arms as overwhelmingly chosen by American society for that lawful purpose. The prohibition extends, moreover, to the home, where is needed in defense of self, family, and property is most acute. Under any standards of scrutiny that we have applied to the enumerated constitutional rights, banning the home, quote, the most preferred firearm in the nation to keep for use of one's home and family, would fail constitutional muster. So deviating from the language here quick, what the court is saying is that a complete ban on firearms in the home, which was proposed by the District of Columbia at the time and struck down by this court, was unconstitutional. It was a bridge too far. And that goes back to what is the compelling state interest? The compelling state interest has to be somewhat logically connected to the harm that creates the compelling state interest. And in this case, people said, listen, it's a bridge too far, not people, the court, I should say, the Supreme Court of the United States said, it's a bridge too far to essentially ban firearms in one's home. The compelling state interest to be able to protect people from gun violence cannot be met by simply banning firearms, essentially, within one's home. So that was a bridge too far. But it's important to go back to the beginning of the opinion in which I read, because that is what is directly on point to the conversation that we are having here. And I'll go back to that language. From Blackstone through the 19th century cases, commentators, and courts have routinely explained that the right to keep and carry any weapon whatsoever in any manner whatsoever and for whatever purpose was not a right to keep and carry any weapon whatsoever in any manner whatsoever and for whatever purpose. And I want to go back to what one of the comments of my colleagues a little bit earlier of simply saying, listen, if someone's going to illegally carry a firearm, they're going to illegally carry a firearm. Why should we have this law? It's only catching law-abiding gun owners. Well, that's the same thing as saying, listen, I drive down Interstate 80 every day to Omaha or Lincoln, and I always see people speeding. So maybe we should get rid of the speed limit law. It's just getting otherwise law-abiding citizens tripped up with the law. Well, the reason why we have the speeding law is because there is now, speeding is not a constitutional right and driving is not a constitutional right, but there is a state interest in making sure that people are going a certain speed limit, much like there is a state interest, and in this case, a compelling state interest in ensuring those that have concealed firearms have the requisite training, background checks to be able to carry those firearms. And the District of Columbia versus Heller in the United States Supreme Court found that those are reasonable restrictions and that there is a compelling state interest to be able to have those restrictions. So colleagues.
Time, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator John Kavanaugh, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, I'm not taking a position on AM 2297 yet because I haven't read it, but I wanted to finish what I was getting at in my last comments. I spent too much of my time complimenting Senator Flood, so I'm not going to do that this time. So what I was saying is that that is an argument that Senator Flood made, that conduct was against the law at the time that the action was taken. However, we're here having a debate about whether or not these are fundamental rights, whether or not this is something the state should be engaged in regulating or not, which is a little bit different than a normal, if you were to go and say, we're going to lower the speed limit from 65 to 55 and you got a speeding ticket going 60 at that time, or raise it from 55 to 65 and you got a speeding ticket going 60, that is a different situation than what we're talking about here. As I was saying, that Senator Ben Hansen referred to the inalienable right aspect of the Nebraska Constitution, and Senator Brewer has talked about these being God-given rights and that they are fundamental rights and things along those lines. And so when we're talking about the action like this of the legislature, when we're talking about whether or not this is a fundamental right, we have an obligation not only to change things going prospectively, but we have an obligation to right the wrongs of the past. And so if you believe this argument that possession of a concealed weapon is a fundamental right, we have an obligation to correct the prior abuse of the state then, right? Isn't what your argument, everyone's argument that's in favor of constitutional carry, that the state is in essence overstepping and abusing people and overstepping the state's ability to regulate in this space? And so that is why I brought that amendment. That's why I was sincere about that amendment. And that's why I appreciate people who've had that conversation with me about the importance of that. And we've had conversations about future amendments that are going to come up and about their disparate impact, meaning that they affect some people differently than others. They have a disproportionate negative impact on some people. And the amendment that will come up later, that I think is 2106, is one such law amendment change, that it would have a disproportionate impact on people in the city of Omaha. A disproportionate impact, as Senator McKinney said, on people in his community. And gun laws, our criminal laws in the state, have historically, for generations, disproportionately impacted adversely people in that community. And that we have an obligation, when presented with an opportunity to correct a historic wrong, to take that action when presented to us. And so one such opportunity was presented today to be one, philosophically and intellectually consistent on that issue. And to say that our principles extend to protections of individuals who are not us, go beyond ourselves and protect people who we don't necessarily think of as part of our community and who have been adversely affected by these laws. And that was kind of what the option I presented and what I was arguing for. But again, I don't know where I'm at on 2297.
1
but
minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll push my light again. I'll read it. I'll get back in. There's a lot of people in the queue. But I think it's important to recognize that we're talking, a lot of people, many people, there are people here who support 773 and probably the other amendments who argue this is a fundamental right. Well, 2106 and the denial of my amendment before is a firm recognition of the fact that we are not in agreement about that people do not recognize it as a fundamental right. Our actions do not reflect the fact that you think this is a fundamental right. And so that is what that vote was. That is what I'm talking about. And that's what I'm going to continue to talk about. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Matt Hansen, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good afternoon again, colleagues. Colleagues, I do appreciate the debate and discussion we've been having back and forth on constitutional rights, civil liberties. And I do want to take a time and talk about that just a little bit more, including about the training aspect. And I do think it's fair to say that there's probably not a clear one-to-one comparison to training on something that I can necessarily think of. But it's also, again, it's not the difference between you don't get to own or use or bear a gun at all. It is the ability to conceal the gun. Open carry, as we've all acknowledged, is allowed in the state of Nebraska. It's allowed in the capital. And that's, to me, a difference and a key distinction, and including a key distinction in which I think there is a compelling state interest to weigh in and have at minimum some sort of training. And part of the reason I get to that point is listening to the proponents of this bill talk about what some of the goals or some of the outcomes of this are, including that we've had some discussion about kind of especially rural communities where there's minimal law enforcement, the desire basically to have more armed citizens who can then kind of form some sort of quasi law enforcement role to pick up the gap where there are maybe very few deputies spread over a very large area. And if that's the purpose and that's the goal, or at least one of them that we want to encourage, I think we have an obligation of the state to make sure that those people have some training. If our goal is to encourage citizens to take up this like kind of quasi law enforcement, collective protection aspect, we better be sure they have an understanding of what we're asking them to do, which is why some element of training to me makes sense at a minimum. Because we're talking about more than just above personal self-defense at that point. Obviously, I don't think people necessarily need extensive training on whether or not their own defense of their self, you can recognize when you're in danger and when you're not. Most reasonable people can. But if you are going to say intervene in a situation from a distance as a bystander, I really hope you have a good sense of knowing what you're doing and that nobody is wrongfully harmed in that situation. And encouraging those situations while also encouraging there to be less or no training, to me is concerning, and to me is sending the state down the wrong path. So that's one of the things that why having a training requirement to me is important, and I want to hear a pretty good reason for why we should get rid of it, especially if part of the reason, again, for this expansion of concealed carry is to kind of intervene in more situations like in the absence of law enforcement. We're taking a very highly trained and regulated profession and in theory kind of talking about uploading it with more volunteers, which is concerning to me just kind of in general. I think a great solution would be to increase coverage in areas where it's gapped. And so I wanted to highlight that. Again, when we're talking about this, connected to that, we kind of keep getting to this phrase and we keep hearing it about the law-abiding citizen. And this notion that there are, criminals and there are law-abiding citizens, and that is two distinct classes of people, and at some point you fall into one category or the other. And for one group, laws always matter. For the other group, laws never matter. And don't get me wrong, I understand that people fall along the spectrum. There are certainly some people who with flagrant disregard for kind of society and our laws and for the safety of others. But those groups aren't as separate and distinct as as is portrayed on this floor. Plenty of people, we know of situations, plenty of people go from law-abiding citizens their entire life. And then in a moment of anger, in a moment of frustration, maybe under the influence of drugs, something happens and all of a sudden they're, a violent felon. That's where everybody starts off in one category. Everybody starts off in the law-abiding category until they're not. And so if one of the things we're talking about is this notion of the law-abiding citizens versus the other versus criminals, colleagues, that's a moving category. That's a thing that changes over people's lives. And that's when you just start talking in these absolutes, like there's no overlap, there's no groups, you're in one camp or the other. Colleagues, it's incredibly easy for somebody to make the jump from one camp to the other. And that's something we should keep in mind when we're talking about kind of the public safety policy of the state of Nebraska, especially with expanding access. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hansen. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon, colleagues. I stand for correction. Before we broke for lunch, I said that I was just opposed to 773 and that I wasn't interested in compromising. I'm not dying to compromise, but I will say that if there is a compromise to be had, I agree with AM 2297, and I believe that Senator Moorfeld already mentioned this, that it doesn't include, but I would like to see included in this AM, or even amended into it, that the Nebraska Commission on Law Enforcement and Criminal Justice shall offer the required training for free. I have no problem whatsoever with the state paying for the permit and the training, but I still want them to exist. And if the issue is that we are creating a barrier to a Second Amendment right to bear arms legally in Nebraska, then let's eliminate that barrier by not charging those fees. But we still need to require safety. So if the state has to pay for the safety training, then let's do that. I don't know where the money will come from. I'm sure Senator Stinner is thrilled with me making this declaration, but perhaps it can come from, I've learned a lot about fees lately. So we've spent, when you get your driver's license, you pay $24 to get your driver's license renewed. And it actually only costs the DMV $14. You know what happens with that other $10? It just goes to the general fund. It could go to the Nebraska Commission on Law Enforcement and Criminal Justice. We can just direct that fee to that fund and pay for some of this. I'm not opposed to the state paying for you to get a conceal and carry. I'm not opposed to the state paying for you to get your training. Obviously, I think everyone knows I have other priorities above that for how I'd like to see the state funds being spent, but I would put this above a lake and a canal for sure. So if Senator Brewer is interested in entertaining Senator Moorfeld's proposition here, we could maybe just move things along, in my opinion. So I don't really have a lot to say on this other than that. That was sort of my big thing on this, is just making sure that we are, when we're making changes to the gun laws in Nebraska, that we are being smart and that we are taking into consideration the safety of our law enforcement, and also taking into consideration the safety of our public. And I do believe firmly that if you are going to have a concealed weapon, deadly weapon, that you should have to go through training. Yes, people are going to break the law and have a concealed weapon when they shouldn't. But that's not what this is about. This is about lawful citizens wanting to carry a concealed weapon. We should require training. Period. We require training to drive a car. That can kill somebody. We should require training for a weapon. We require training before somebody can operate on you. Can't just like say, hey, Bob, my stomach hurts. Would you mind cutting me open and taking a look?
One
No,
minute.
you have to go through like a lot of training for that, before that can happen. So I just hope that this is a serious conversation about a compromise. If it's not, that's okay too. I'm fine with just not voting for things. But if it is, I just wanted to say for the record that I support that, and I will be just paying attention to the debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Pansing Brooks, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I've mentioned a couple times, I brought up Heller earlier, and the case that affirmed that Heller applied to the states via the 14th Amendment. What I wanted to read a little bit into the record now is the case New York State Rifle and Pistol Association Incorporated versus Bruin. So on November 3rd, 2021, this case was heard in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. They haven't ruled yet. There was discussion about just going ahead and passing the bill and then having a study. Or again, we could just have a study and wait till the Supreme Court rules, and then we will know what the law is on concealed carry. In the Bruin case, Robert Nash and Brandon Koch each applied for a concealed carry firearm license for the purpose of self-defense. The licensing officer denied both applications, finding that neither individual met the proper cause standard. And again, we hear about cause, we hear about the standard. The standard right now in our laws is the prudent person standard, that there is an exception to the concealed carry laws in the state of Nebraska right now under the prudent person standard. If a prudent person would think that somebody had concealed carried, but it was in the case of self-defense or a need that most people would think was a reasonable reason to conceal carry, then that is an affirmative defense. They are not found guilty at that point. So for our previous senators to have said, oh, we don't even have concealed carry in this state, well, that's just bogus. We do. We have an affirmative defense right now to conceal carry. And so I think it's interesting. The New York courts define proper cause as requiring the applicant to, quote, demonstrate a special need for self-protection distinguishable from the general community, unquote. So again, these are issues, these rights are not complete and 100%. They have ramifications, they have limitations. That's what the Supreme Court has continued to say. Now, maybe they won't. Maybe they'll find out that they'll decide this in this term, which will be this summer. Maybe they'll decide that anybody can conceal carry at any time that they want. And if that's what they decide, that's what they decide. Why are we trying to hurry this through? I've talked with Senator Brewer's staff. They're very educated on this in this area. And again, going straight to Senator Brewer's office if there's any kind of issue, because they are all well educated, trained. They're just amazing people in that office. So I'm going to go straight there. They know that, but they're also fun. So that would be another reason to go there. So, but when I was talking to Dick Clark, who is in Senator Brewer's office, he told a story about a woman in Omaha who was stopped and then told the police that she was concealed carrying, which is exactly what she's supposed to do under the law. And when that happened, then the police said, well, let's see your concealed carry card. The woman had carried it in another purse. And so then they arrested her and put her in handcuffs in front of her children in the car. That's just wrong. So I agree something needs to be done, but that is just wrong. That, I mean, in our state now, if somebody's traveling and they don't have their registration for their car, you have the ability to come forward and show that you actually have the car registered. And that kind of problem solving should occur in the case of concealed carry. If somebody's gone through it and they have a concealed carry permit, they definitely should be able to prove that they have it without getting arrested at the time. So I think, again, it's time to wait and pause on this a little bit. I'm happy to have the state pay for the permits. I'm happy to have the state pay for the training. I just think it's important that we have that training and that we go forward and
Senator.
have the permits. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator Pansing Brooks. Senator Hunt, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have a problem when we're so black and white about rights. And when we don't understand the difference between natural rights and rights that are given to us by a constitution, which is by a bunch of people, not by God, not by, they aren't God-given rights. Owning a gun is not a God-given right. It's a right that a bunch of founding fathers in the 1700s put into a document by choice that we are now in 2022 interpreting to mean that people should be able to own as many deadly, semiotic, any type of weapon that they want and carry them around without a permit and without any training. And I mean, I just don't think that that type of black and white reading is what the Second Amendment is meant to be about. And I'm not an attorney, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not trained in legal scholarship, but I have watched with interest over the course of my life the national gun debate that we have about gun safety and gun control and what degree we're going to expand this right to in our country. And it's not a natural right, it's not a God-given right, it's a policy choice. And it was a policy choice in 1776, and it is in 2022 here in Nebraska, and it is state to state, as you see different states with different types of laws restricting and governing how people can use firearms, and country to country. I mean, in all different countries in this world, we see different rules around self-defense and gun ownership and all of these things. I support gun ownership. I understand what I feel to be the spirit of the Second Amendment, and I support it. Just as some of you in here, you might say, I support the spirit of the right to vote. But I still think that we need to have voter ID, and we need to make sure that there's certain people who can't vote, and we, have to put all these other restrictions on it and make sure that we only allow voting at certain times in certain places in certain ways. We want to put a watermark on the ballot. You know, I'm in the Government, Military, and Veterans Affairs Committee too, and we hear bills every year, more so in the last couple years because of the big lie, you know, the idea that the last election was stolen or whatever, and the division we have in our country about that. We've heard more bills than ever restricting the right to vote and curbing voting rights. And this isn't the kind of argument we ever have around those questions, because pretty much everybody agrees that it's not black and white, that there's some wiggle room there and some interpretation that has to be done of the Constitution and the intention of the Founding Fathers. And there's definitely historic agreement that the Constitution can be interpreted in different ways. When I was, you know, I mentioned I've spent the biggest part of my life, most of my life, following with interest this gun debate. I remember I was 13 when Columbine happened, and that was the first time, you know, Dylan Klebold and Eric, I can't remember the other killer's name, but that was the first time I realized that I might not be safe in my school. And school shootings continued to happen, you know, at an increasing level, and now they happen all the time. And no amount of shootings have changed our policy. No amounts of thoughts and prayers have changed the outcomes of these horrible murders.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. And so you don't have to be an attorney or a constitutional scholar to have an informed opinion about the regulations that should, could, might, can be placed on our militia, on the people. We have to balance the public health interest of making sure that kids are safe at school, that people can worship safely. We know we have a rising white supremacy problem in this country, and I saw many, not right now, sorry to like point at you, but many white supremacists up in the balcony today watching these proceedings, because this is something they're very interested in. And I'll speak more about that on my next time. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Hunt. Senator Erdman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon. Let me start with this. I'll announce the Bridgeport girls basketball games going on, and it's halftime. They're ahead 30-27, which is good news. This is not such good news, this filibuster that's going on. So we're talking about everybody needs to get a background check before they buy a weapon. I'm sure it's required of the criminals to get a background check. I'm sure they have to do that, right? Fingerprinting plus a background check. You can't get a gun without it. I read that on the internet. It's got to be true. I'm not a lawyer. Senator Hunt said she's not a lawyer, but I did stay at a Holiday Inn Express once, so that might qualify. So we're wasting time, and so what better thing to do but talk about ridiculous stuff for wasting time. The point is this: Senator Moorfield's not interested in passing 2297, and they're doing an outstanding job of acting like they're concerned about the citizens and about what happens in protecting people. But I'll give you this. The people in Ukraine today probably wish they had a gun. They have very restrictive gun rights in Ukraine. I'll bet they're passing them out today. And most of those people in this body that are opposed to us having constitutional carry will probably be tickled to death that if in another country somebody was handed a gun to protect themselves, but not here. I have received numerous emails about this bill 773. I have yet to receive one from my district asking me to be opposed. But I have gotten several, more than several, from the districts in the East, 9, 7, some of those districts asking me to be opposed. And Senator Wayne yesterday said we represent the whole state. He's exactly right. But first and foremost, I need to represent those people who sent me here to do the job they expect me to do. So they've expected me to come here and protect their rights, and that's exactly what 773 does. So I will not vote for 2297. I'm not overly impressed with 1757, but I understand the necessity for it. So I will vote for 1757 and 773. And this will continue, this debate. This filibuster will continue until we get to be 8 hours, and then we'll see if you have 17. You may not have 17. Senator Brewer may not have 33, but he might. But Senator Brewer has brought this before. He's very committed to doing what he believes to be right. And if I'm going to err, I'm going to err on the side of Senator Brewer. He has done numerous things to promote this country, to make us safe. What we need to do is support what he wants to do, what he's trying to do to help Nebraskans. So give up on what you're trying to do here because of some idea you have that people are going to be more dangerous if people have guns. And you
1
heard
minute.
Senator Lowe talk this morning about what happened to his wife. When I was treasurer of our local Ag Society, we would collect the gate money on the 3rd and 4th of July. I would have money bags that had $30,000, $35,000 cash. When I went to take that to the bank, guess who I took with me? I took a deputy with me because I needed protection. All right? There are a lot of issues that have been brought up today as a smokescreen to try to convince us that what we're doing here is, like Senator Flood said, the sky is going to fall. The sky didn't fall in 2006, and it hasn't fallen since. So we get an opportunity to vote on 773 tomorrow, I believe.
Time, Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Erdman. Senator John Kavanaugh, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. So, well, first off, I said I'd push in so I could come back and report on my opinion on Senator Moorfeld's amendment. And I would say I will vote for AM 2297. And I think, Senator Merman, I think that Senator Moorfeld is sincere about this amendment. I'm reading it, and it seems to reflect a lot of the things that have been talked about today. But I just wanted to continue on kind of my line of conversation I've been having about my amendment and what it is. There's been a lot of people who have talked about, I think Senator Pansing Brooks and Senator Moorfeld have talked about what the case law is as to whether or not the state is empowered to make these sorts of restrictions. Whether the state can do that is, to this point, pretty clearly settled. That the current law is permissible under the federal and the state constitution and has been litigated before. So the question here is not whether or not we can or should, whether or not we can do this is whether we should do this, right? And I had my amendment, which was an attempt at saying, if you think this is something we should do, it should include this sort of correction, historical correction. And that is an important thing because the argument by so many people here is of why we should take the action in AM 1757 and LB 773 is because it is a fundamental right, because it is a constitutional right, because it is a divinely derived right. People argue that, they've said that is why we should do this. We should trust people, we should do these things, and we should empower them under the Constitution. The Supreme Court does not agree with that interpretation. I'm am one of the people who stood up here many times and said I've disagreed with the Supreme Court before. I will continue to disagree with them in the future on different issues, but I agree with them on some other issues. However, they do articulate the highest court in the land, the determination of the Constitution. But my point is that if you really do believe the arguments, that it comes with other things. So when we make arguments, not just in this case, but when we make them in other cases, we have a lot of conversation here about unintended consequences or ancillary consequences or whatever other choice of words people would like to make. But there are unintended consequences, there are intended consequences, but there are things that are related to the issue of which we should contemplate and address as we go forward. And my point is, if you want to use the Constitution as a sword, you must also afford it as a shield to others, right? You have to, you can't say, I want these rights just for me and for my friends and for people who I think are good people. You have to think about how it's going to affect everybody else. And so the problem with AM 1757, and if we get to 2106, is that it limits the protection that is being afforded under the argument that it is a fundamental right. And so if something's a fundamental right, it's a fundamental right for everybody, regardless of where you live, right? Regardless of your zip code, your census tract. So if you really think that, I know it is an expediency argument. I understand that. I hear that. I understand that people who actually agree with my amendment voted against it for expediency's sake. But the point of a fundamental right is that it is not expedient, is that you protect it even when it's inconvenient. And so you are looking for a convenient way to assert a right. And there are lots of other rights that need protecting as well, and that we should not fall on convenience, expediency, when we have conversations about those rights. And so that is why I continue to talk about my amendment that has failed, and why I will continue probably to talk about it in the future. And I'll bring that bill again in the future, depending on what happens here, and I'll maybe bring bills of a similar sort. But again, I will vote for AM 2297. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Moorfield, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I just want to respond to a few comments that were made on the floor. First, I know Senator Erdman's a man of many talents, but mind reader I know is not one of them. And I am sincere in AM 2297. If that passes, then I will support LB 773. And that's sincere. And we can also work on some language that deals with providing free training and allowing for folks to get that training and be able to do it in a way that's more accessible. So unless Senator Erdman magically became a mind reader overnight, which I know is not true, he doesn't know what I'm thinking, he doesn't know what I'm feeling, and so he can keep his thoughts to himself and he can talk about exactly how he feels and not necessarily how I feel, because he doesn't know that. So in any case, in terms of the Ukraine actually has more firearms per capita before the war than pretty much, I think, any of the European countries. I wasn't able to get through my research right before I went on the mic, but it's 10 per 100 people, which is a lot fewer than the United States, but there's not very many countries that can compare to the United States in that way. So I'm going to get back and do a little bit more research, but in terms of European countries, the Ukraine has fairly good access to firearms before the war. Now, obviously, the president of Ukraine has issued some emergency orders and decrees given martial law and the state of war there, and they're much more accessible now. In terms of Senator Erdman's comments about helping Nebraskans, I've heard from a lot of Nebraskans on this issue on both sides, quite frankly. I got a few hundred emails opposing this. I got well, I probably wasn't targeted, but I got a decent amount of emails. I got a lot of emails supporting LB 773, but nobody told me, man, I'm having a hard time getting a firearm, or wow, it's tough for me to get that permit. Now, like anything, anytime I say something like that on the mic, I'll get a few emails right after I get off the mic, and somebody will tell me that. But leading up to this, until I said that, I have not heard that as the issue or the cause for this legislation. So I don't think we're really helping Nebraskans here. I think what we're doing is just helping with a preference of Nebraskans not wanting to have a permit in order to conceal carry. And there were some folks that were saying that a little bit earlier, that this doesn't actually help reduce crime. And there's actually some studies that have come out recently, because some of these laws have been in place in several different states. One of the studies by Siegel stated that states that have weakened their firearm permitting system has experienced an 11% increase in handgun homicide rates. Another study by Donahue and Weber found that states that have weakened their firearm permitting system has experienced a 13 to 15% increase in violent crime rates. So there is an emerging body of study, peer-reviewed study, that is showing that states that weaken their permitting systems do see an increased crime rates, particularly violent crime with firearms. And I'm happy to go through those studies a little bit more. In terms of
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. In terms of support, it's pretty overwhelming. And I get that we've got some folks up in the balcony, and I get that we have some folks that are pretty passionate and been emailing us, but recent surveys have shown, these representative sample size surveys, have shown that 88% of Americans think that you should get a permit before carrying a concealed gun in public. It's pretty overwhelming. There's not very many things that you get 88% support of. Another study showed that over 80% of gun owners, non-gun owners, Republicans, Democrats, and independents agree that high safety standards are critical in issuing concealed carry permits. So I appreciate that there are folks that are passionate about this, like Senator Brewer, folks up in the balcony, folks that have emailed us, but overwhelmingly, the general public believe that there should be a permit before carrying a concealed gun in public. And there's many other studies that mirror this as well.
Time, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Moorfeld. Senator Holleran, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Oh, if Ukraine would have been able to do what they tried to do in 1990. 1990, Ukraine considered imposing comprehensive gun laws, but they became gridlocked over whether or not private gun ownership would increase crime or improve security. Apparently, there are attorneys in Ukraine as well who will argue and finesse over the words whether or not a fundamental right is a fundamental right. Fast forward to today. The world is captivated by Ukraine's resistance to Russian invasion, especially since much of Ukraine's resistance comes from ordinary citizens taking up arms in defense of their homeland. Ukraine has a fighting chance in part because it has taken dramatic steps to provide its people with firearms recently, hadn't before the invasion. More than 25,000 automatic rifles and 10 million rounds of ammunition have been distributed to volunteers in Kyiv. In the United States, even supporters of draconian gun control are announcing they stand with the brave Ukrainian people in their armed resistance. The glaring contradiction between these positions, supporting gun confiscation on one day and gun distribution the next, seemingly hasn't dawned on many of these ideologues. Their contradiction is apparent in action as well as in words. President Joe Biden rushed to arm Ukrainians stands in contrast, sharp contrast, with his desire to disarm ordinary citizens. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is another prime example. engaging in tyrannical gun control at home while supplying the Ukrainian resistance with machine guns, pistols, carbines, and 1.5 million rounds of ammunition. The European Union shows a similar hostility to self-defense rights of people, even as it gives Ukraine about $500 million worth of lethal aid. So it's deja vu all over again for the Ukrainian people. They went through this debate and they got stalemated, gridlocked. In hindsight, I'm sure they wished they had proceeded as they had desired with giving more rights for gun ownership. Arming average citizens hasn't always been the Ukrainian way either. A 2014 report noted that the country had inherited the Soviet civilian gun control system, which provides for restrictive gun owner licensure and the registration of firearms. Kind of sounds familiar. Hopefully, the events of 2022 have settled that question once and for all. An individual's natural right of self-defense applies equally to the defense of life as to the defense of a nation. And neither individual nor nation is secure without the ability to exercise it. This should never have been a question. As it happens, Ukraine is tragically late to expand legal protection of gun rights. Recently, the president of Ukraine freed prisoners and armed them. To help defend their nation. Ukraine's parliament acted on an emergency basis just before Russia invaded, a little bit too late. Hopefully they can persevere. Better late than never, certainly. But imagine if the people of Kyiv had been training with their weapons their whole lives. Imagine if they knew them like they know the back of their hands instead of quickly learning to handle them during an invasion. Their resistance, as well as their example of the world, would be all the more powerful. I understand people are going to say, well, Senator Halloran, this is an invasion on the part of another country. Well, it is an invasion by Russia, turned into a lot of war crimes that are being committed there. Now it's rapidly devolving into a street warfare between Russian citizens in Russian military uniforms fighting against Ukrainians in the streets. And the Ukrainians are desperately underarmed to protect themselves. So it has evolved into a circumstance, an example of why civilians need to be armed. And
Time,
is
Senator.
that time? Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Halloran. Senator Lathrop, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I didn't expect to follow Senator Halloran, and I was listening, as I do right before I speak. I'm trying to collect my thoughts, and I was listening to that, and I would suspect that President Biden recognizes the difference between some reasonable regulation of guns in the United States and Ukraine being at war. I don't know what Ukraine being at war and us giving them guns to defend themselves has to do with this bill. I don't. I listened. Okay. That's the argument for this. You know, when this bill came before the committee, I kind of want to pick up where I left off the last time I spoke. When this bill came before the committee, the folks that came in support said, we don't want to have to pay in order to be able to carry a concealed handgun. They said they go to class. We heard today that people are taking more classes with constitutional carry passing in other states. And so to me, it sounds like a money issue. It's a money issue. We don't want to have to pay a fee, and we don't have to pay to the state, and we don't want to have to pay a fee to the person that's going to teach the class. And trust me, more of us will take the class if we have constitutional carry. And so Senator Moorfeld's offered an amendment, And this isn't a waste of time amendment. This is an amendment that would say you don't have to pay the fee. Now, are we down to, is this about the fact that you have to have a permit at all? That no one should make you have to have a permit to carry a gun in your pocket? And then if that's it, and then there's no compromise. There's no way to address what we hear are the concerns, and it's hard to find a place where there's a middle ground. And we have been, as happens from time to time, encouraged by Senator Flood to try to reach some kind of a common ground. And if the issue is paying these two fees, then let's talk about it. Here's the beginning to that conversation with an amendment that would say you don't have to pay the fee to the state. And then let's talk about who or how these folks can go through training. I have a legitimate and a real concern for people who have a handgun and haven't been told when to use it, when they can have it in their pocket and when they can't. We are setting people up to become non-law abiding citizens. They walk into the bank. They walk into a bar. They walk into any one of the prohibited places that Senator Brandt listed for you. And by the way, I didn't even know those. But are we supposed to know those intuitively? I get that ignorance of the law is not an excuse. That's a well-worn line, and it's very true. But at the same time, when you talk about somebody who's going to have a gun, we watch on TV, you see these stories where people chase down an individual thinking that they are performing a law enforcement function, and they shoot him. It's not isolated. It happens. Are we
1 minute.
doing those? Pardon me?
1 minute.
Thank you. Are we doing those people a favor by not making sure that they know when to shoot and when not to shoot, when to pull the gun out of their pocket and when to leave it there, where they can take that gun? The training is an important component of this. I think as I listen to the debate, it seems to be the biggest concern that people who are opposed to 773 have. So Senator Moorfield's 2297, it's the first step towards answering the questions, unless it's ultimately simply, you're not going to make me get a permit, even if it's free. In which case, it's pretty hard to find a middle ground here. And I appreciate the amendment. I don't think it's a filibustering
Senator.
waste of time. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Lathrop. Senator McKinney, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in support of AM 2297 because I think we should eliminate the fee for the permits to make it easier for individuals to get the, access to the training and things like that. So I think it's a good amendment. But I also wanted to bring up another point that I forgot about earlier when we were talking about the purchase permit in Omaha. A lot of individuals that I know that get the Omaha permit get denied and have to appeal because Omaha police deems you possibly as a questionable person. Your last name is Johnson or something like that. And because of that, they deny you. So you have to appeal it. So just allowing OPD to still screen people is still a problem, which is why I do not like AM 2106. But I do like AM 2297 because I think it's a good amendment. And I think we should eliminate fees and a lot of other fees in this state because I just think we should. And I just want to remind everybody that I'll keep repeating it until every time I get up that we have to really think about the impact of legislation that we pass in this body and how it will or would impact individuals, no matter if the individual lives in North Omaha or in Scotts Bluff somewhere or in Norfolk. We should think about how a bill impacts everyone. And that's what I try to do with everything that I introduce is, okay, yes, I want this, and I think this would be great for my district, but how would this affect the rest of the state? And how can I not only be a senator for North Omaha, but be a senator for the state of Nebraska? And in doing that and thinking about that, I thought about AM 2106, and I just see it disproportionately affecting people of color, not only in my community, but possibly across the state. But, you know, that's the thing. And we can't disregard that. I think for a long time, our country and our state, we've passed things without fully evaluating how policies, especially dealing with the criminal justice system, law enforcement, guns, and things like that, affect communities and people. We have to really start thinking about those things, because it's one bill that has annoyed me since it has made it to final reading, and I'm still waiting for it to show up, is that DNA bill, because I think it's a horrible bill that would disproportionately affect my community and other communities across the state, because I don't think you should have to give your DNA because you got charged with a crime. Convict me, yeah, you could take it, but not based on some premise of you caught me doing something or somebody accused me something that I'm innocent of, and you're just taking my DNA and it's stuck in a federal database that nobody knows how you could get it out. And I'm almost sure you can never get it out the federal database. And that's kind of centered on why we don't need 2106, because if we pass LB 773 with 2106, then we pass this DNA bill, I'm going to be upset with a lot of people. And I'm just going to be honest, because you're for sure disregarding the concerns of individuals in the state, especially in my community. We stood up and talked about water yesterday and how we need water for Western Nebraska, and it's vital. And other things have come up this year because it's vital for this group or these stakeholders. But there's always a but. Somebody stood up and said, oh, with gun rights, it's always a but.
1
When
minute.
it's with Black people or people of color, there's always a but. But we still should probably do this because the Omaha Police Department wants us to do it, because we're going to upset them. They upset people every day. They discriminate against people every day. Who thinks about it's more people that they discriminate against than are on the police force. Do we not think about them? What about those people? That's what we have to think about. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator McKinney. Mr. Clerk, for items.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Committee on Enrollment and Review reports Legislative Bill 717, 780, 848, 925, 925A, 964, 1037, 1173, and 1236, all placed on final reading. Amendment to be printed, Senator Erdman to LB 750. Motions to be printed to 1013 and 14, both from Senator Wayne, and an amendment to 876 from Senator Geist. That's all I have at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Returning to debate, Senator Matt Hansen, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Based on the queue, this looks like it's going to be my last time to talk today. And so I want to kind of reframe the debate and talk about how the debate over the course of the day has gone. And for the people in this body, the speech isn't necessarily for you, but it's for public and others watching. I've been here and I've been present and I've listened to this debate almost the whole day, aside from a coffee break. And what we started off at in this morning was that talking about regulations being burdensome and fees are too high. That's what this morning centered on from proponents of this bill. At that point, also probably unjustified, they were criticizing opponents of this bill for not willing to compromise, and including really targeting this bill on, we're talking about handguns, don't talk about rifles, don't talk about other things. So regulations are burdensome, fees are high on handguns. And the opponents aren't going to compromise. That's what we heard all morning. We get to Senator Morfeld proposing a sincere amendment that he has drafted based on this morning, talked about and committed to on the microphone, committed to in public, and all of a sudden we're getting told it's not a sincere amendment. Oh, and oh, by the way, what we really need is unlimited stockpiles of guns to fight the Russian army. Colleagues, that's how the debate has morphed over the day. I mean, talk about moving the goalpost. Talk about moving the goalpost. We went from like this fee is burdensome and it's hard to find training sometimes. It's hard to make time for training to what if the Russians invade? Like, this is where this debate has been going. And that's where I kind of sometimes jump in and say, as somebody who has concerns with the bill, like, how do I negotiate with that? Like, what policy lever are we even on when we start going these ways? Similarly, we're talking about this, and Senator Erdman kind of poked fun at this, but the notion that criminals won't follow, of course criminals will follow the law. It was something along those lines of, of course criminals are going to be going down, getting the permit, going to the background check, all that. Stayed at a Holiday Inn Express, that whole bit. Colleagues, I know criminals. I know there are people who are going to violate the concealed carry law. I know people who are going to have illegally concealed guns who then commit crimes. The solution to that is to arrest and prosecute those people, not lower burdens or not lower regulations and training to conceal weapons. If you're concerned about illegally concealed weapons causing crimes, why would you want to encourage more concealed weapons? Like, you say that like my logic doesn't make sense. I hear those speeches and I can tell you your logic doesn't make sense to me. Like if we're talking about criminals won't follow the law, let's reduce the barriers so more people can act like the criminals we're scared of by having no regulations, no training, no background check on concealing weapons. Like, that's the logic escapes me, is why would we want to go down that? Why wouldn't we want to enforce the gun laws that we do have on the books in order to provide public safety? Colleagues, these are the things that I'm struggling with throughout this debate, because I'm approaching this from hearing from my police department, knowing my community, what I think my constituents want from me, because we've talked a lot about what our constituents want. I certainly know how my constituents feel about this issue, and I've granted there's both sides, but it's not overwhelming. It's certainly not overwhelming in favor. And so trying to come up with some sort of nuanced policy discussion to figure out how to move forward, and I'm being presented with, like, Joe Biden's going to seize our guns and Russia might invade. Colleagues, how am I supposed to debate that? How am I supposed to figure out what the policy argument on the exact fee and training requirement for concealed carry in Nebraska should be?
1 minute.
To me, it really seems that proponents are the ones who have no desire in compromise. To me, it really seems that the proponents are the ones that are just kind of spending time talking about empty, unconnected things on the microphone. Like, if you want this to move forward and you want some other people who have concerns about it to vote for it, like, I'm all ears, but starting off by just attacking any sort of amendment as being insincere and questioning the motives and integrity isn't the way to start it, colleagues. Like, if you want a sincere discussion, let's have a sincere discussion. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hansen. Senator Walls, you're recognized.
Thank you. I'm going to yield my time to Senator Hunt.
Senator Hunt, 455.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Walls, for the time. I was raised in Blair, Nebraska, which to me was a small town. I know plenty of you guys are from smaller towns, but to me it was. And our population at the time was about 5,000. So that was the level of that. But being close to Omaha, it wasn't quite an isolated community that you see in other parts of the state in terms of what is a small town and what isn't. But I was raised by a conservative Catholic family. In college, I went to college in my city too, and I was the president of the campus conservatives, and I was the founder of the Second Amendment Club, the gun club, which I want to tell you about. But I think that conservatism was different back then. I think it was definitely different for my parents than what you see on the far right today. I think it was a little bit more moderate. And I have this memory when I was about 10 years old, my parents took me to see Ken Burns at the Lead Center here in Lincoln. Ken Burns had done a bunch of documentaries, and I don't remember the one he had just recently done, but it had something to do with Nebraska. And I don't even think I watched it. It's just my parents were fans, and so they took the kids, and all of us went to the Lead Center to watch Ken Burns speak. And I was not, even as when I was a small child, I was a pretty opinionated person. But I think it took me a while to figure out what opinions it was that I wanted to have. But one of the really formative things that happened to me was when I was about 10 and I saw that Ken Burns talk when he came. And one of the things he said was, I just remember him going, "I am against fundamentalism of any kind." And I don't know why that moment stood out to me so much, but I remember him up on the stage going, "I am against fundamentalism of any kind." And we were talking about religion, but also fundamentalism in politics and government. And that was the context of that comment. But it's something I thought of for the rest of my life until now, being against fundamentalism of any kind, that stuff is not that black and white, that there are shades of gray in every single thing we do. And in everything I do, especially here, I'm always just so much more interested in how things actually affect people and measuring the morality of different policies and the values that we have, not by a psychological exercise or, a mental idea or some like rigid dogmatic consistency in morals and application of those morals. To me, it always has to do more with how it actually affects people. What are the actual outcomes of that, policy or law or choice or rule or whatever it is? And does it cause harm? I am motivated by the desire to mitigate as much harm as possible. I don't think that we can judge the morality of something based on the consistency of the idea. Like when we look at the Constitution and we take everything to its most radical possible interpretation, that the Second Amendment means that it is a God-given
minute.
right, to use a phrase used by some of you, thank you, Mr. President, to own a gun, any kind of gun, because it's about self-defense and everyone has the right to self-defense. The logic for me isn't there. The founding fathers could not have conceived of the kinds of weapons that we have for sale today at Walmart. Couldn't have conceived of a Walmart, but that these killing machines are so readily available doesn't make it a right. I do think that everybody has the right to self-defense. Absolutely. Like, don't be weird. Of course they do. What are you supposed to do if someone's coming up to you and trying to harm you or kill you or punch you or shoot you? You should be able to defend yourself, and no one is fighting against that right. There are many, many non-lethal ways that people defend themselves. Every female friend I had in college and growing up had some, brass knuckle thing on their keychain that they can put on and like poke
That's time,
somebody.
Senator, but you're next in the queue, so you may continue.
Thank you, Mr. President. Or they would have some pepper spray or something, even a taser. And these are all things that can incapacitate people for self-defense. And so when the argument, something that a lot of people say to me who are critical of my position, they say, well, you think we shouldn't even have self-defense? Like, where in the world did you get that? No, I'm not saying lay down and let someone beat the crap out of you. All I'm saying is like maybe some of the provisions of LB 773 that says you can have a big old gun with no training and no permit because it's a God-given right. That is bad policy. That's such bad government. It's laughable to me. There's no logical consistency there at all. And I can't believe we're talking about the Ukraine conflict now as a reason why we need a bill like LB 773. Ukraine is an active war zone that was invaded by Donald Trump's best friend, Vladimir Putin, who a lot of you couldn't stop saying good things about a minute ago. Perhaps when Nebraska goes to war with Colorado over the use of the Platte River water, we will be an active war zone, but there's no reason for us to arm people like that. I think that some people have this fantasy that we're going to be in some kind of civil war, or we're going to be in some kind of fight against the government. And it's coming from a place of like loving that fantasy. And you can buy guns, you can own guns, you can hoard guns, you can do what Senator Brewer does and have a whole basement of guns. And I've seen pictures of his armory, and it's really impressive. If you own those guns legally and you have training and there's a reasonable, expectation that you're not going to use those guns to hurt anybody or yourself. With the evolution of weapons and self-defense that we've had since 1776, I think that that's today what a well-regulated militia would mean. Balanced with the need for public health, balanced with the other factors going on in society of increasing white supremacy, increasing white nationalism, increased access to guns, increase mass shootings and copycat who want to do this too. When the world gets less like that, then we can look at that reality and legislate based on that reality. But that's why I'm not able to come to like a black and white place with a policy like this, because the reality of the world makes things really gray. All of those dead first graders in Newtown, Connecticut makes things real gray. All of the dead concert goers at Mandalay Bay in Las Vegas makes things real gray. All of the people who died at the Pulse shooting in Orlando. I would not prevent somebody's right to have a gun. But the regulations that we need to have in place for public safety are something I take very seriously. And people certainly have the right to defend themselves, so that's not it. When I was in college, I was on one. I was really, really, really conservative. And I tried to start a club at my college, 70% because I wanted to, 30% because I wanted to be really provocative and I knew it would upset people, called the Gun Club. Gun Club. And the board of the college, the Board of Regents told me I couldn't start the gun club because they didn't like the word gun. So then I wrote all these editorials and columns, and I
1 minute.
organized this whole protest at the campus because they were infringing on our First Amendment rights. And I made it like this huge First Amendment rights thing that they're not letting us say gun. Words don't kill people. You should let us say gun, whatever words we want, whatever. I ended up not winning that. And not knowing what else to do. So we found this compromise where I call it the Second Amendment Club, because surely you can't be offended by the phrase Second Amendment. And what we did is we took people around, not just the college, but around the whole community, and we took them to a place up in Tacoma, and we taught gun safety, we taught hunter safety, and we shot a lot of targets. We just did target shooting, and we always turned it into a fun thing. And there was actually one place that we stopped going to because the owners there were encouraging underage people to drink. And I was concerned about the
Time,
underage
Senator.
drinking. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hunt. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good almost evening, colleagues. I am still in support of Senator Moorfeld's amendment, and I'm hoping that we will vote on that and adopt it, as well as an amendment to have the training provided by the state and paid for by the state. I think if we were to do that, that would really create a consistency in what the training was and how it was administered and how it was accessed, which I think is important. I've said before, I'm not a gun person. I'm not opposed to people owning guns. I'm not opposed to people's rights to own guns. I just firmly believe that it is a right, a constitutional right in this country, but that doesn't mean that we can't put in safeguards to make sure that people who are suffering from severe mental illness or have a criminal background, variety of reasons, that they shouldn't own a gun. We need to be making sure that we're doing that. We've had shootings in Nebraska. My district has West Side, or not West Side, it is West Side, but it also has the West Roads Mall where the Von Mar shooting was in 2004. And the Von Mars shooting again, I think it was in 2019. Nobody fortunately died in that shooting, just injured. But that's a problem. And I'm in a white middle class part of Omaha, Nebraska. It's a problem. And so we need to make sure that we're making the appropriate investments in behavioral health. And we need to make sure that we're keeping track of who has a gun. Even if it is their right to have a gun, we should still keep track of that. And if they're going to have it out because they don't have a concealed carry, then we know. And if they're going to conceal carry it, we need to know that too. So I do support the state absorbing that cost if that's what the rest of the body wants to do. I wouldn't stand in the way of that. Again, I said before that I have other priorities on how to spend money, and I don't know how much it would cost to do that, but I certainly would be open to that being the amendment that we move forward with. So with that, I think I will, if Senator Moorfield would like it, I will yield him the remainder of my time.
Senator Moorfield, 225.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. We're getting to the end here today before we begin tomorrow. I just want to note a few different things. First, I want to reiterate that AM 2297 is a sincere amendment. If we adopt that amendment, I will support the underlying bill, and I will work with Senator Brewer and others to come up with a free training requirement as well that's provided by the state. So when I heard from folks that were proponents of this, they were talking about how the permitting process was burdensome. It got in the way of law-abiding gun owners from being able to exercise their right to carry a concealed weapon. And I think that this remedies a lot of those concerns. Now, it doesn't get it all the way. And we've already talked in depth about why and how it doesn't get us all the way. And I've already talked about the Lincoln Police Union's letter, which is pretty succinct, but I also want to read a little bit from Chief Ewan's letter as well. She also testified in person as we discussed. After review of this, and this is what she noted in her letter, which is in the record, after review of this proposed legislation and internal conversations of its impact to our organization and community of Lincoln, I oppose LB 773 for the following reasons. First, officer and public safety. While Lincoln is generally a safe community, we have experienced our share of gun violence related to gangs, drugs, and robberies. Allowing persons to freely carry concealed weapons, handguns, shotguns, knives, or rifles will make our job of safeguarding Lincoln more difficult. This bill will allow the criminal element of our communities to carry legally, as they may not be a prohibited person. Without a permitting process and training, you have individuals who shouldn't be carrying or carrying without the proper skills necessary to assess the situation, determine when lethal force is lawful. This also creates the propensity for mistakes, which can result in innocent people being injured, including our officers. There's some more here, but I'm limited on my time. I think this goes back to the fact, and we'll talk tomorrow with some studies that show that people who have the proper and adequate training also have less of a risk to bystanders that are innocent as well. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Moorfield. Senator Blood, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to, first of all, build on Senator Moorfield's comments about the Ukraine. I think the research that you were missing is that Ukraine ranks 36th out of the world's 40 largest arms dealing nations, and they're actually listed as permissive and not restrictive. So I'm a little confused by what Senator Erdman had to say. In fact, civilians there are licensed to carry concealed handguns. So actually, they don't have very strict gun laws there in Ukraine. So I'm a little confused by this. But with that, I would ask that Senator Moorfield yield to some questions. I have concerns about AM 2297.
Senator Moorfield, will you yield?
Yes.
So Senator Moorfield, do you remember LB 51 that I think it was passed actually out of the Judiciary Committee last year before?
Yep, it was last year.
So were you aware that that bill created really a financial burden for the NLETC?
I'm not aware of that issue at this point in time.
Would you say that's right? The NLETC is actually funded by the Nebraska Crime Commission?
I was also not aware of that.
They are.
Okay, good.
And so I wanted to share with you that there's been a problem at the training center there. You may have remembered when the governor gave us our beginning of the year speech that he was going to be putting funds into our training academy. And one of the reasons he had to do that, and I haven't seen the budget yet, so I don't know if that's actually happened, is because they'd been woefully underfunded. And because of that, we had law enforcement, especially in our rural areas, not getting trained. And we've been losing law enforcement at an alarming rate in rural Nebraska. It became a safety issue because they were also told to cut back on spending. So basically what happened was our rural areas got screwed because they'd hire people who would wait to get trained at Grand Island, funded under the Crime Commission, and they'd be put on a waiting list. In fact, Sarpy County had to put together their own training academy because we couldn't wait any longer because we're the fastest growing county in Nebraska. And that means that La Vista, Sarpy County, Bellevue, Papillion, and Douglas County Sheriff's Department, we got together and spent our own money and put together our own training academy. So the concern that I have, Senator Moorfeld, is not your idea as to how you want to pay for it, but the concern I have is, can they definitely pay for it? Because if the funding falls through yet again, because there's always been promises made that, you know, we're always about back in the blue and it's important to back law enforcement, but for some reason, our executive branch ignored this training center when it came to budgeting, and that those funds fall under the Nebraska Crime Commission. So if we're going to put this mandate on them, my concern is how the heck they're going to pay for it. Would you say that that's a valid concern, Senator Moorfeld?
I'd say, yeah, absolutely. I'd say it's valid, and you know, businesses are booming when it's coming to revenue in the state right now. So I think that we can find some revenue with an A bill, hopefully,
Right.
if this amendment passes.
And make sure that they also get the money that they need for the training that's been woefully ignored by the
Absolutely.
executive branch for a very long time.
Yes.
Thank you, Senator Moorfeld. Friends, we pass a lot of bills with good intentions, and LB 51 is one of those bills, and it was one that we had good bipartisan support on. It was one that would not only help law enforcement, but also help the residents of Nebraska.
1 minute.
But what we find is sometimes things happen behind closed doors, and although we think we're moving something forward that's going to be funded and it's going to happen, ultimately it doesn't always happen. And there's unintended consequences. So I want to make sure that if we do push something like this forward, that it truly is going to be funded and not just pretend funded. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Blood. Senator John Kavanaugh, you recognize, and this is your third opportunity.
Oh, thank you, Mr. President. Oh, there we go. I just wasn't close enough to the microphone, I guess. So, again, I rise in support of 2297. I do think it addresses a number of the concerns that have been raised by individuals on all sides of this issue, making sure that people have access to the permits and the training necessary without the burden of cost. And I think that's a good cause endeavor. And so I appreciate Senator Moorfeld for bringing that amendment and talking on this topic. I actually wanted to address what Senator Halloran mentioned about Ukraine. I know a few other people have talked about it. It's been in the news. It's come up on this floor before, and I watch it on the nightly news every night when I get home. And one of the things to talk about, they're arming their people in Ukraine right now to defend themselves against the Russian army. And if you watch the stories and you see what's going on, they're arming their people, which is they're calling the Territorial Defense Force, I think. And volunteers ranging from age 18 up to age 65, men, women, but they're volunteering, and then they are still putting them through training. Their country has been invaded by their neighbor, the Russian army. Massive tanks, 40 mile long convoy of armored vehicles going to Kiev, I guess we have now figured out is the way to pronounce it. And they're still taking time when they're putting guns in the hands of these individuals to train them. I saw a video on the news last night or 2 nights ago where they show the soldiers, the indoctrinees, assignees, volunteers. They hand them a gun, which I'm no gun expert, but it looks like a military-style assault rifle. They take out the clip, which is one of those curved style clips, and they run, they jump, they fall down on their jump on the ground, and they put the clip in, and then they have to shoot at a target in front of them. And so they're putting these people through firing training, arms, how to use the arms, medical training. And so they're still taking the time to train these individuals when they are in the middle of an existential threat. People say existential a lot. This is actually the meaning of existential, which means the threat to their very existence. And so they are facing this where some of their major cities have been captured, where they've been surrounded, their capital is being bombarded. They are still taking the time, the effort, and the care to train people in how to use firearms, how to use guns, because it is important. This is an important thing to do. So, and these are the types of guns that we're not talking about here in concealed carry. These are large guns, they're assault weapons. But to say that if the people of Ukraine had a concealed carry, everybody was concealed carrying a handgun, and that was going to prevent the Russian army from invading, I think is probably a misunderstanding of the situation. That the fully armed country of, I think, 30 some million, of that includes adults, children, elderly, fully armed with small arms, handguns, against that level of incursion into their territory is not going to change the outcome. They are, thank you, Mr. President, they are being armed with American arms that we are sending over of differing sizes and calibers, from those assault style weapons all the way up to rockets, missiles, things like that. And I think they're asking for planes and armored vehicles as well. And those are the types of responses in that. So it's a false comparison, of course, and whether or not they were armed or had gun control in that country is not the reason that Russia invaded and is currently occupying portions of the territory. But the important point is, even in this existential threat situation, they are taking seriously the need to have training in firearms before sending people out to use those firearms. So just an interesting point that Senator Halloran brought up. I just thought it bear mentioning as we go forward. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Mr. Clerk, for items.
Mr. President, I do thank you. Name add Senator Wayne to LB 795 and to 1092. And priority motion, Senator Breezy would move to adjourn until Friday, March 11, 2022 at 9:00 a.m.
Colleagues, you've all heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Opposed, nay. We are adjourned.